The story begins in the year 1390 of the stellar calendar on the northern continent at mankind's last fortified stronghold, Swinw City. The streets were engulfed in towering flames, and savage touty beasts were devouring humans everywhere. Survivors scattered in panic, desperately trying to escape the relentless hunt. Just as a mother bent down to lift her fallen son, a massive touty locked onto them, reaching out to snatch them up and swallow them whole. A golden longsword ripped through the air. A single strike instantly obliterated the beast in the next heartbeat. The creatures surrounding the mother and son were cut down by a barrage of flying swords collapsing into lifeless bodies. The one responsible for all of it was the male lead, Seong Yong Xiang, piloting the Abyssor battle armor. Over 100 years old, he was the last saint-ranked star soul master humanity had left. For decades, he had relied on the Star-Lord system he obtained from a hidden realm. Alone, he guarded mankind's final bastion, preserving a fragile chance for the remnants of humanity to survive. But today, faced with a beast horde surging like a tidal wave. No matter how many combat mechs he deployed to fight back, it was ultimately futile. When the final group of survivors boarded the spacecraft to evacuate Earth, the Star-Lord system informed Seong Xiang that he had already missed the optimal evacuation window. Seong Xiang stood there, his body covered in wounds. He watched as the spacecraft slowly lifted off. The system actually suggested redirecting the enemy's attention toward the ship, buying himself time to retreat. On the screen, he saw the terrified eyes of the mother and son he had saved earlier. This time, he chose not to run. After fighting for so many years, he was tired. As long as humanity's spark remained, it would rise again one day. If he wasn't going to retreat, then this would be his final contribution to mankind. Once he had been mocked by classmates for his crippled soul vein, and even his own father had cast him out because of it. The woman he loved had left him for someone else. And yet now he had become humanity's last hope. To ensure that mankind's flame would endure, he and his battle armor ignited into a blazing inferno, dragging every last beast with him, taking them all down with him. But just when he believed he had died, a voice called out to him from within the darkness. When he opened his eyes, he discovered he had somehow been reborn. Carrying all the memories of his past life, he had returned to his 18-year-old self. According to those memories, the Nanzo Mecha Martial Academy he attended would soon be destroyed in the beast tide that was about to erupt. Countless classmates and instructors would fight to the death to defend it. And back then, he had been nothing but a loser with a crippled soul. All he could do was watch his teachers and classmates charge forward one after another while he stood there powerless in his previous life. They mocked him because he could only maintain his star soul armor for 3 minutes, calling him the 3-minute man. Even his girlfriend's family broke off their engagement over it. Later, when his father chose to stand and die with the city, he had been driven away for being too weak. The true love he finally found had also died tragically right before his eyes. But this time, he had been reborn with over 60 years of knowledge and battle experience. Even the Star-Lord system had returned with him, so he would correct every regret from his past life, and the demons that haunted him for decades would finally be erased. Yet today, at the Nanzo Mecha Martial Academy, another freshman had just arrived. Following directions from the bald security guard at the gate, the newcomer searched for the freshman registration office, only to get lost and wander into a dead-end alley. With no other choice, he reinforced himself with soul power, then vaulted clean over the tall wall in a single leap. What appeared before him was not the registration office, but the women's locker room where he accidentally locked eyes with the class monitor. In an instant, both of them were red-faced, and the pervert label was practically stamped onto him. A group of female students charged after him, swinging knives, spears, and sticks like they meant business. Before long, he was hog-tied and dragged straight into the principal's office. The freshman's name was Lu Yan, currently an early yellow-ranked Star Soul Master. He had been specially admitted thanks to his outstanding performance at the Star Soul Preparatory Academy. The principal promptly assigned him to Class 10, the infamous gathering place for problem children. The class monitor puffed up like an angry pufferfish, her cheeks turning bright red. After receiving his student file, she shot him a murderous glare and said, "Follow me, student." To Lu Yan, she added, "We're heading to logistics to pick up your uniform." After the two left, Secretary Xiao Yu reported to Principal Gui Jing, "We've received a missing person report." Assistant Instructor Chuni announces that a Class 10 student, 16-year-old Seong Yong Xiang, has been missing for 3 days and no one can get in touch with him. In this report, it was about none other than our male lead, Seong Yong Xiang. The last classmate to see him said he muttered something about having 3 days left before completely disappearing. So, what could have possibly happened to make Seong Yong Xiang vanish right after he was reborn? Well, according to legends from the eastern continent, thousands of years ago, colossal beasts suddenly appeared and descended upon the world. They mercilessly slaughtered and devoured every intelligent life form, wiping out civilizations. Humanity was powerless to resist and was pushed to the very brink of extinction. But in humanity's darkest hour, immortals descended from the heavens. Forging bones from starlight and shells from condensed souls, they summoned powerful beings known as the Star Soul Generals. With their supreme divine power, they drove back the beasts. After the war, the immortals left behind soul jades which housed the Star Soul Generals. These jades were said to choose those who were destined to become heroes, granting them the power of the Star Soul Generals and passing down secret techniques for cultivating the 2 Star Soul Meridians. Over time, these chosen people came to be known as Star Soul Masters. Under the protection of these masters and their Star Soul Generals, humanity gradually began to thrive. Then, about 1,000 years ago, A human sage managed to replicate the Immortals' methods, creating mass-produced Star Soul generals. From that point on, Star Soul Masters gathered countless followers, reclaiming lands that had been ravaged by the beasts. The founder of the Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy was a hero chosen by the Star Soul General Zuo Si. He secured the Nanzhou territory for the Tandu Kingdom and established the academy 400 years ago. His Star Soul General later transformed into a Soul Jade, which was sealed within this very statue, guarding the academy and waiting for the next chosen hero. Hai Yan proudly recounted the academy's glorious history to the freshman next to her, Lu Yan. The hot-blooded boy immediately swore to become a hero, just like the founder, setting his sights on becoming one of the 8 generals of Tiandu and earning the title of the strongest Star Soul Master. And at that very moment, the towering statue of Zuo Si in front of them began to tremble. Hai Yan instantly recognized it as a fluctuation from soul power resonance. She wondered, could this fool Lu Yan really be the next host for Zuo Si? Not long after getting their uniforms, Lu Yan and Hai Yan arrived at the academy's training arena. 2 students were already locked in combat, each piloting a mass-produced Wei Wen-type mech. It didn't take long for the red mech to be defeated by the blue one, and the instructors began their evaluation of the match. Although the blue mech won, its pilot's sluggish and drawn-out style earned some sharp criticism from Instructor OPE. Instructor OPE then arranged for Lu Yan and the class monitor Hai Yan to face off in the next round. Hearing this, the class monitor's blood began to boil with excitement. She thought finally a chance to give that peeping pervert a proper beating. Both of them took out their standard-issue soul talismans and initiated the Star Soul Assembly. Soon enough, the two were facing each other, each inside their own student mech. Still fuming, the class monitor immediately went on the attack, leaping toward Lu Yan with dual swords at the ready. Lu Yan could only fall back, drawing his own blade to parry her relentless assault. On the sidelines, Instructor Chengyi joked about Lu Yan's refusal to fight back, saying he was just dodging and running away. But Instructor OPE cut in. "Don't underestimate him," he said. "His footwork looks chaotic, but every single step narrowly avoids Hai Yan's strikes." Lu Yan knew Hai Yan was 2 minor realms above him, meaning there was a significant gap in their mech's performance. For now, his only option was to create some distance. The class monitor then switched to a crossbow cannon for some ranged attacks, but she clearly lacked precise control over the soul-powered shots, and her firepower dropped instantly. Watching Lu Yan hop around like a panicked rabbit, Hai Yan trembled with frustration. She drew her sword once more and poured every last ounce of her soul power into the blade. The students watching from the sidelines immediately recognized it as her ultimate move. They knew there was no way Lu Yan could dodge this, even with a shield. Sure enough, a second later, Hai Yan unleashed a move nicknamed Angry Crow Takes Flight, diving straight down toward him. She then followed up with Tornado Destroys Trailer Park, a move that smashed Lu Yan's mech into scrap metal, just as everyone assumed he had lost. But then Instructor OPE suddenly declared Lu Yan the winner. Though his mech was heavily damaged, his sword was already pressed against the class monitor's vital point. He had simply chosen not to deliver the final blow. Afterward, the instructors gathered all the students in the plaza to review the match. But just as they started, the bright sky abruptly darkened. The Academy's defense alarms blared to life. All around the campus, spatial rifts began to tear open in the air. One toothy beast after another began crawling out of the fractures in space. Was the Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy about to fall yet again? Ever since the alien tawny beasts appeared, the city had been suffering from massive destruction. They launched indiscriminate attacks against civilians. Countless citizens didn't even get a chance to run for their lives. The Mecha Martial Academy itself became one of their primary targets. Instructor Chang piloted his mech and managed to hold off the first wave, but the beast's assault was overwhelming. His mech's damage level shot up to 70% almost instantly. Thankfully, the soul armor could regenerate using the pilot's own soul power. The beast gave him no time to recover, regrouping almost immediately for another strike. Lu Yan and Hai Yan both wanted to rush into the fight, but Instructor Ope ordered them to retreat and charge straight into the heart of the battle by himself. Just as a beast lunged at Qing Yi with its gaping maw, Instructor Ope crashed onto the front lines in his own mech. Suddenly, another beast attempted to ambush them from behind. For a split second, its massive claw seemed to slow down as if restrained by something unseen. That brief interference gave Ope the opening he needed. One clean slash took the tawny down, but the beast kept pouring in without end. With only 2 mechs, there was no way they could hold the line. As Lu Yan and He Yan were retreating, several unidentified flying objects appeared in the sky above the Academy. At that moment, Ope received a call from the Academy's command center. The unknown craft were reinforcements from the Academy. They linked up and formed a temporary squadron. The squadron was placed directly under Ope's command, and they had one mission: to hold the training arena sector and prevent the beast from spreading further, just as 8 mechs of the Student Council's discipline unit descended from the sky. The reinforcements had officially arrived. Ope issued orders instantly. Instructors and rescue teams were to form a 12-mech anti-beast formation, the Tiger Wing formation. They swore to protect the students behind them at all costs. While the Academy's forces were locked in a bloody battle, a mysterious figure piloting an equally mysterious mech appeared beside the statue of Zuosi. What was he planning? Meanwhile, Principal Gu watched the live battlefield feed with a tense expression. Acting liaison, Xiao Yu continued to deliver updates, confirming all reinforcement squads had reached the front line. A containment perimeter centered around the spatial rift had been successfully established. Principal Gu then gave the order. All Nanzhou Academy units were to hold their positions. The beasts must not be allowed to break past the perimeter. On the front lines, the battle intensified. The temporary squadron members fought shoulder to shoulder like brothers in arms. But Lu Yan and Hai Yan, who had just retreated moments ago, were now being relentlessly chased by a stray beast. It was closing in fast. As the class monitor, Hai Yan made a split-second decision. She ordered Lu Yan to retreat toward underground entrance number 9 while she stayed behind to cover him. She summoned her Wyu-type mech, and initiated the Star Soul assembly. In the next second, she intercepted the pursuing beast head-on, but the difference in their strength was obvious. The beast seized her mech's head in a crushing grip. Even while pinned down, she shouted for Lu Yan to get away. Hearing this anger surge through Lu Yan, why was he always the one running? Why did he have to watch others sacrifice themselves for him? They were both Star Soul masters. Why was he so weak? If only he had a Star Soul general. The thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. He had resonated with the statue of Zuosi earlier. What if he was the true next host? With that power, he could return and lead everyone to victory. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the statue of Zuosi. He shouted again and again, begging for its power to save them all. But when he finally stood before the statue, he saw the real protagonist Seong Yong Xiang missing for 3 days, standing there, and in his hand was the Zuo Soul Jade. Rewinding to before the beast tide erupted, Seong Zan had been cultivating in his dormitory, pushing for a breakthrough. After 3 days and a mountain of pills, he advanced from the early yellow rank to the peak of the yellow rank, though his crippled soul vein remained an issue. In his previous life, he hadn't obtained the reforging pill to repair his soul vein until his 50s, but the pill's grade had been too low, leaving permanent side effects. During battle, he had to constantly rely on soul-replenishing pills just to maintain his power. This time, if he could refine a high-grade reforging pill, his crippled soul vein could be completely restored. So he had pre-ordered the final ingredient from the largest alchemy shop in the city. Unfortunately, the clerk informed him the shipment was still in transit and wouldn't arrive until noon. According to his memories from his past life, the academy was fated to fall to the beast tide tonight. That meant he had only a few hours left to set up defensive arrays across campus. His goal was to minimize casualties as much as possible. With his current strength, he could only deploy low-tier slowing arrays. These were techniques he had picked up on the northern continent in his previous life. Mere basics back then, yet they were 100 years ahead of anything currently practiced on the eastern continent. At that moment, he overheard the class monitor explaining the statue of Zoe to Luan. The scene dragged him back to his past life, when he had stumbled here like a stray dog begging the statue for power only to be met with silence. But this time was different. He immediately ordered the Star-Lord system to scan the statue. The system quickly pinpointed the location of Zuochi's soul jade and asked whether to forcibly draw it out. That was what caused the faint tremor in the statue earlier, leading the unaware class monitor to assume Lu Yan had triggered a soul power resonance. However, the soul jade was still unbound at the time and couldn't be duplicated, so Seong Xiang withdrew and chose not to force the extraction. Just then, word came from the pharmacy. The final ingredient he had ordered, the heavenly dragon stem, had finally arrived. As long as the reforging pill was a success, he wouldn't let his classmates die in vain this time. Shortly afterwards, Seong Xiang arrived at the Nanzhou Grand Pharmacy, where a receptionist guided him inside. In the VIP section, he was received by a white-haired beauty, but the price of the heavenly dragon stem was staggering. Short on cash, Seong Xiang decided to trade pills. He had refined himself, but the attendant initially refused with a helpless smile. But when she saw the Tier 3 soul replenishing pill, her attitude shifted instantly. The quality of every pill he laid on the table surpassed what the pharmacy could usually obtain, and there were even some she couldn't name. In the end, all she could do was meekly ask for a chance to consult the shopkeeper. Seong Xiang agreed, but requested to use their alchemy room. Unfortunately, the shop didn't have a resident alchemist. The original furnace had broken long ago, and no one had repaired it. Fortunately, in his previous life, he had studied void refinement from the spirit folk of the southern continent. Now, even without a furnace, he could refine pills with his bare hands. As Seong Xiang began working inside the alchemy room, the attendant submitted the pills to the shopkeeper for review. The moment the shopkeeper recognized the Tier 5 blood ignition pill in his hand, his expression shifted instantly. He stared at the attendant in disbelief, unable to believe someone was actually selling one. When she confirmed it, he shot up from his chair in excitement and immediately demanded to meet the seller. But when they reached the alchemy room, they were met with a locked door. Seong Xiang had set up a restriction array on it, making it impossible to open. Inside, the reforging pill he urgently needed had already been successfully refined. After swallowing the pill, he sat cross-legged on the spot and began the process of repairing his crippled soul veins. About 2 hours later, he stepped out of the alchemy room and immediately saw the two of them waiting anxiously outside. After a round of polite flattery on both sides, the shopkeeper Hong Fong got straight to the point. He was willing to offer $300,000 for the pills, but as a gesture of goodwill, he'd rounded up to $500,000. Seong Xiang pondered for a moment, then calmly pulled out 2 more blood ignition pills from his storage space. He proposed a deal of $1 million for the whole lot, seeing the conflict flicker across Hong Fong's face. Seong Xiang knew he had taken the bait. Hong Fong was almost certainly a collateral member of the Hong Merchant Guild, the power behind Nanzhou Grand Pharmacy. In his previous life, the Hong Merchant Guild had been one of the 3 great merchant guilds of the eastern continent. controlling 70% of the Tandu Kingdom's medicinal and alchemy industries. The Hong family's influence ran deep through both political and commercial circles after generations of accumulation. They were not only wealthier than nations, but also possessed terrifying networks of connections and resources. In this life, if he wanted to withstand the beast tide looming on the horizon, he needed to build his own power base and fast. Money, connections, resources, every single piece mattered. Sure enough, when he entered the shopkeeper's office, Hong Fong issued Seong Xiang a platinum VIP card, numbered 666, and even waived the remaining balance for the heavenly dragon stem. After sealing the deal, Seong Xiang left the pharmacy. What the shopkeeper didn't know was that he could casually refine piles of those pills whenever he wanted. Walking back toward the academy, a man dressed in black approaching from the opposite direction caught his eye. With the system's assistance, he detected that the man's soul power was concentrated in the middle, Dantian, a cultivation method unique to the northern nations. Could he be from the kingdom of Milan, the northern border of the Tandu Kingdom, shared territory with Milan, one of the three nations that inherited the orthodox culture of the eastern continent? According to his memories, in just 3 years, the warmongering nation of Milan would shatter the balance of power and launch a full-scale invasion against Tiandu. This war would drag the other human nations on the eastern continent into the fray, ultimately leading to total destruction. So why would someone from Milan show up in Nanzhou right now? Could they have something to do with the upcoming beast tide? As Seong Xiang was wondering about this, a striking woman with crimson hair walked right toward him. The sight of her instantly brought back memories he wished he could forget. Her name was Anne. She was an assassin from the mysterious organization Taiwan and the host of the Star Soul General Lu Bu. She followed Taiwan's guiding principle of universal love and non-aggression, which meant she would forcibly intervene in wars between nations to stop humans from slaughtering each other. In his past life, a disgraced Seong Xiang had crossed paths with An on the battlefield. After surviving several near-death experiences together, they eventually fell in love, but in the end, she died right before his very eyes, leaving a wound in his heart that never truly healed. So seeing her again, he reacted on pure instinct, turning and grabbing her arm, desperate not to lose her a second time. And at that exact moment, the Star-Lord system chimed in with a notification. Star Soul General Lu Bu successfully duplicated. Then it hit him. In this timeline, this was their very first meeting. For an assassin from Taiwan, having her identity exposed was a death sentence, so she violently wrenched her arm out of his grasp. An assassin's short blade materialized in her hand and she lunged straight for him. To her surprise, Seong Xiang neutralized both of her hands in a single fluid move. But just as she demanded to know how he knew Taiwan's assassination techniques, he noticed she was being followed. Suddenly, the 2 soul-replenishing pills he had taken earlier kicked in, causing a wave of searing pain to wash over him. The agony was so intense that he doubled over right in the middle of the street just as the men in black trailing them began to close in. Thinking fast, Seong Xiang dropped into a full split on the spot, tripping one of the men mid-stride. The man stumbled and started to curse him out, but his companion quickly stopped him. In the next moment, Seong Xiang shamelessly switched gears, playing the part of a professional accident scammer. "Hey, hold it right there. You bump into me and think you can just walk away." The hot-headed guy who tripped was about to let loose a string of insults, but the bearded man beside him leaned in and whispered, "Tiandu Secret Investigation Division. We're on official business. Kid, we suspect you're connected to a wanted fugitive. You're coming with us." But Seong Xiang immediately knew something was wrong. These guys weren't from the Secret Investigation Division at all. In his past life, he'd been a commander in the Tiandu Black Armor Guard and had dealt with the division countless times. He nonchalantly slipped a hand into his pocket, letting a corner of his student ID show while casually dropping one of the division's secret code phrases. To his surprise, the man actually responded with the correct counterphrase. The bearded man immediately cupped his fists in a formal greeting and signaled for his companions to fall back while he stayed behind. "We are agents directly under the Tiandu Secret Investigation Division headquarters," he said seriously. "We're in the middle of a critical operation." "You were just seen with our target. Care to explain?" Seong Xiang scoffed. "You mean that assassin from Taiwan? The Nanzhou division has been tracking her for a while now. If you hadn't interfered, I would have already captured her." After a bit of back and forth, the bearded man was clearly thrown off. Their intel never mentioned Nanzhou's involvement. Having no other choice, he decided to lure Seong Xiang into the trap they'd already set, planning to eliminate both him and the assassin in one fell swoop. As they walked to meet up with the others, Seong Xiang noticed that the man's soul power was concentrated in his middle dantian. Just like that black-clad figure from before, this confirmed Milan spies had already infiltrated this deep into Tiandu's heartland. A chilling thought suddenly crossed his mind. In his past life, Nanzhou Academy fell during the beast tide and the soul jade of Star Soul General Zuo vanished without a trace. Could spies from Milan have been behind it all? Just then, they passed a street vendor selling tangaloo, which are skewers of candied hawthorn berries. He remembered how much Ayan loved these in his past life. Instantly, all thoughts of national security and enemy spies flew out the window. Winning his girl back was far more important right now. He quickly bought a skewer, took a bite to make sure it was good, and then hurried to catch up with the bearded man. Meanwhile, Aeon had been cornered in the trap set by the men in black. Wasting no time, she summoned her mech and stood ready for battle. To everyone's astonishment, the mech was none other than the legendary Star Soul General Lu Bu. Piloting the Star Soul General Lu Bu An faced her attackers with the fearless presence of a legendary warrior, while Seong Xiang casually watched from the sidelines. Seong Xiang turned to his companion and asked casually, "You're making quite a commotion right outside Yanding City? Aren't you worried the city garrison will notice?" The bearded man just smirked. Model. A Tier 5 spatial confinement array had been set up beforehand. They could practically tear the sky apart in there, and no one on the outside would even notice. As he was talking, he secretly started summoning his weapon, but the moment he moved, Seong Xiang struck first, slamming him to the ground with a single palm. The leader of the black-clad squad noticed instantly, and ordered his men to eliminate Seong Yong Xiang. They had seriously underestimated him. Sword in hand, he weaved through their formation like a phantom. 1-step 1/1 kill. Even a sword saint would have applauded his form. Still, the sheer numbers forced him into a grueling rhythm. While maneuvering, he commanded the Star-Lord system to hack into the spatial array and take control. Meanwhile, Asun's situation was growing more and more dire. The enemy had clearly done their homework on her. They deployed a star-imprisoning soul lock array, completely restraining her star soul General Lubu. The formation was an ancient design created specifically to capture star soul generals. She couldn't even deactivate her star soul construct. Milan's real objective was to forcibly extract Lubu's soul stone. Just as the extraction device began to read the data, a blue light suddenly flared from the forest nearby. The Wuhan-type mechs assigned to capture Lubu were split clean in half by the beam. Even the soul chains binding Lubu shattered instantly as Asun turned around in shock. She saw another Lubu armor standing behind her, identical in shape, but completely different in color. At that moment, the Crimson Lubu mech transmitted Seong Yong Xiang's voice. "Mind picking up the pace? I've probably got 3 minutes tops." Asan was stunned by the appearance of a second Lubu armor, but with Seong Yong Xiang in the fight, the tables suddenly turned in their favor. The couple from his past life moved in perfect sync, cutting through enemies together. In the midst of combat, she started to notice something. Every single move he made was incredibly efficient. He landed precise strikes aimed directly at the enemy mech's cores. He was only at the peak of the yellow rank, yet he fought with the calm efficiency of a veteran with decades of battlefield experience. Once he joined the fray, the enemy forces collapsed in no time, leaving only a long-haired, balding lieutenant alive. The sight of 2 Lubu mechs had clearly shattered the man's sanity. His expression twisted, his eyes wild. He still charged forward in a desperate last stand. In an instant, Seong Xiang fully synchronized with his mech, gripping the sky piercer Halberd Fong Tian. 2 swift strikes severed both of the enemy's arms. The lieutenant was reduced to a human stump. Utterly defeated, Seong Xiang immediately began interrogating him. From the questioning, Asan finally confirmed that Milan operatives had orchestrated the ambush. Seong Xiang sighed to himself. She was still so green at this point, just as the two were exchanging some playful banter after the fight. The lieutenant suddenly snapped, igniting his soul power, attempting to self-destruct and take them down with him. But Seong Xiang matched his soul power's frequency, suppressing the detonation through resonance, then followed up with a single punch, blasting the mech skyward, where it exploded into fragments. The guy was tougher than he looked. His head hit the ground hard enough to leave a crater. After deactivating his star soul construct, Seong Xiang walked over calmly, spotting the suicide poison hidden behind the man's second molar. He instantly recognized the signature of Nightshade's men, Nightshade, the general, who commanded 330,000 remnants of Taihe, a sword saint from the island nation, and pilot of the Star Soul General Ganjing. In his previous life, while serving in the Black Armor Guard, Seong Xiang had clashed with him, repeatedly losing every time due to his crippled soul veins. Even now, just recalling those battles made the scar over his right eye, a little gift from Nightshade, throb faintly. Asun demanded to know how he had such inside information. Seong Xiang gently took her hand again, assuring her he wasn't her enemy, and even recited the creed of universal love and non-aggression. She still looked skeptical. Then out of nowhere, he pulled out her favorite candied strawberries, which only deepened her confusion. How could he possibly know she liked those? He had countless things he wanted to tell her, but it wasn't time yet. Instead, he asked in a mock-serious tone, "Do you know the key to navigating the martial world?" Asun blinked in confusion. Seong Yong Xiang grinned shamelessly. "Money." The blunt answer left the inexperienced girl stunned. He continued enthusiastically. "With money, you can act righteously without worrying about a reward. With money, you can accelerate your cultivation. With money, there are 100 ways to break through bottlenecks. From individuals to entire nations, resources and interests create conflicts and resolve them. There are no eternal enemies, only aligned interests. Offer enough incentive and even former foes can become allies." Seong Yong Xiang's reasoning left Asan completely stunned. Then a thunderous explosion cracked across the sky. The surrounding energy turned violently unstable. That familiar vibration, a rift was opening. Could the beast tide be starting earlier than it did in his past life? Asun jumped in her tone, serious. "According to Tao and our intel, Milam discovered technology on their last secret realm expedition that can artificially create rifts. They're planning to weaponize it. I came to Nanzhou to investigate, but I walked right into their trap." Meanwhile, the dying lieutenant sat on the ground laughing maniacally as he congratulated his comrades. The sight sent Seong Xiang into a rage. He strode forward, hauled the man up by the collar, and began channeling soul power to torture him. Asun moved to stop him from killing the captive, but Seong Xiang simply tossed the lieutenant aside. "I've already crippled his soul veins," he said calmly. "Take him back to Taiwan for interrogation. I'm heading to Yuanding City to handle the beast tide." He then commanded the system to summon the exclusive mount for Lu Bu's soul armor. The scarlet flame dragon steed, the sight left Aeson speechless yet again. That was a starfall beast you could only unlock at heaven rank. And yet a peak yellow rank cultivator had just summoned it. It immediately reminded her of the intelligence reports on Star Soul General Zuo-Chi. Legend said that Zuo-Chi could shapeshift into other Star Soul generals. Could the man before her be Zuo-Chi's host? Aeson called out after him. Milam's objective this time might be connected to Zuo-Chi. Be careful. Seong Yong Xiang offered a brief thanks before riding off on his starfall beast. He pushed his mount to its absolute limits, racing back toward Yuanding City. He was determined to deal with the prematurely triggered beast tide. Inside Yuanding, the scene was one of total devastation. Alien Tai had reduced entire streets to rubble. Instructor Guo from the Mecha Martial Academy was kneeling on the ground. Several soldiers from the Yuanding garrison stood before him, facing off against the Taotie that had struck him down. Other cadets supported their instructor, preparing for a retreat. Earlier, they had rushed to the western encirclement as reinforcements for the 5th garrison squad led by Zhou Tong, but students were still students. Casualties were inevitable. Several beasts were already closing in from the front with reports of enemy movement on both flanks. The right side was in especially bad shape with a dark mass of creatures closing in, but retreat was not an option. They were under orders to hold the encirclement and prevent the beasts from spreading. Behind them were countless unarmed civilians who depended on them for protection. After a quick word with Instructor Guozhou, Tong ordered the teachers to escort the students and civilians out immediately. He roared, "Tiandu will prevail." Then he led the remaining squad members straight into the swarm of beasts as Captain Zhou was locked in a bloody battle on the front line. One cadet asked anxiously, "Are we really supposed to retreat?" Instructor Guo replied firmly, "I've already requested reinforcements from command. They should arrive soon." Another student, seeing red from the fighting, nearly charged forward to help the garrison. But at that moment, the blonde squad member was sent flying by a beast punch, only to be grabbed by another Teodi. In the next second, the creature opened its massive jaws and bit down hard on the mech. The blonde cadet screamed in agony. Zhou Tong's heart sank. Fortunately, the Academy squad rushed in and kicked the beast away together. To make matters worse, another squad member with glasses was trapped by the Taotie. One devastating punch left him unable to resist. The Academy squad was stretched to its breaking point. There was no one left to help. They could only watch helplessly as he was torn to pieces. Fear spread like wildfire. Voices trembled as they begged Instructor Guo to tell them when reinforcements would finally arrive. They didn't want to die so young. Suddenly, a beast lunged toward Instructor Guo, and a brutal punch slammed both him and his mech into the ground. The female instructor, who had been silent this whole time, felt like she was shattering on the inside. As a mentor to her students, she found herself praying for a miracle, hoping some higher power would save them. The civilians behind them were no different. Fear was etched across every face. Whispered prayers rose toward any god who might be listening. Captain Zhao of the garrison collapsed from sheer exhaustion, yet still tried to force himself back up as the Taotie's massive fist came crashing down toward Instructor Guo once more. A beam of light ripped straight through the beast, sending dust and debris exploding into the air. Everyone froze in disbelief. When the dust began to settle, they saw it clearly. A massive sky-piercing halberd had pierced the creature, and standing before it was the silhouette of a mounted warrior. It was Seong Yong Xiang, piloting the Star Soul General Lu Bu. Among horses, red hair. Among men, Lu Bu. Even the tide of alien Tai pouring in like a flood was nothing compared to the overwhelming power of Lu Bu mounted atop the scarlet flame dragon steed. Lu Bu charged forward with the might of 1,000 cavalry, mercilessly mowing down the alien beast. In just a few moments, both civilians and soldiers were left completely blown away. Was this the reinforcement their instructor mentioned? After taking care of the beast, Seong Yong Xiang returned to their side and dismissed Lu Bu's star soul construct. He walked straight over to the body of a fallen soldier, firmly planted the Tiandu garrison's banner back into the ground, and raising his fist shouted, "Tiandu will prevail." The sight instantly fired up the crowd. The garrison squad and the academy team roared the same battle cry in unison. But when Instructor Guo spotted the academy uniform Seong Xiang was wearing, she froze. How could the academy possibly have a student this powerful? After acknowledging the crowd's cheers, Seong Xiang spotted an unconscious female student nearby. It was her lucky day. She had just crossed paths with him. As a small finder's fee for saving her life, he casually plucked the soul talisman from her Wei-type mech before feeding her a revitalization pill. Carrying the injured girl, he regrouped with the garrison squad. Captain Zhou Tong of the 5th Squad stepped forward and gave their savior a respectful salute. "Senior, thank you for saving our lives." The bespectacled member whose mech had been dismantled whispered, "He looks like an academy student. Should we really be calling him senior?" Zhou Tong shot him a stern look. "In matters of skill, age is irrelevant. The capable will always command respect." Meanwhile, Seong Xiang handed the injured girl over to Instructor Guan. The moment she took the student, he turned to leave. Unable to hold back, Instructor Guo called out, "Are you a student of the Mecha Martial Academy?" Without looking back, Seong Xiang flicked something over his shoulder, leaving only his name behind. He then summoned Lu Bu's Star Soul Beast once more and rode off. Instructor Guo had already pegged his cultivation level yellow rank peak. But how could someone at that level be so powerful? She lowered her gaze to the bottle he had thrown. Captain Zhou's expression changed instantly. "These are tier 3 soul replenishing pills. They're 50,000 credits each. Oh, this tiny bottle is worth my entire year's salary." That made Instructor Guan sigh in awe. Just how strong is the student Seong Xiang? Meanwhile, the injured girl in her arms quietly engraved the name of her savior in her heart. At that very moment, Seong Xiang was still sweeping through the streets of Yanding City, hunting the alien Taoi. His movements caught the attention of a bald elder. The old man narrowed his eyes, which were already narrower than Brock's from Pokemon, and chuckled. An interesting little fellow. Inside the War Command Center, President Gu was monitoring live feeds from across the perimeter. 34 minutes had passed since the battle began. Several squads on the front lines had already lost over half their members and were desperately calling for backup. She immediately asked for a status report on the Mecha Martial Academy. Secretary Xiao reported, according to defensive units in other sectors, it appears slowing arrays have been deployed on academy grounds, specifically targeting the beasts. The fighting is fierce, but there have been no casualties so far. Additionally, Guluan's squad at the 3 o'clock position reports receiving support from a mysterious Star Soul general. The beasts in the 3 o'clock sector have been completely wiped out. President Gu frowned slightly at the report. Just then, new updates came in from the squads at the 4 and 5 o'clock sectors. They had spotted a mysterious mounted Star Soul general sweeping across the battlefield. The footage streamed directly to the command center. President Gu's eyes locked onto the weapon in the video, the Sky Piercer halberd. Could it be Star Soul General Lu Bu? Secretary Xiao added, based on his trajectory, he appears to be heading for the Mecha Martial Academy. President Gu fell into deep thought. Star Soul General Lu Bu appearing at this very moment and heading for the academy. Was he a friend or a foe? At that moment, Seong Xiang piloting Lu Bu reached the outskirts of the Mecha Martial Academy. Seeing the defensive line still holding, he silently congratulated himself for deciding to install slowing arrays inside the academy beforehand. That, combined with Instructor Ope's 12-position Tiger Wing formation, was why they hadn't suffered any casualties. It seemed they could hold out a while longer. He decided to use this chance to extract Star Soul General Zoi's Soul Jade. He quickly made his way to Zoi's statue. After stepping out of the Star Coffin, he ordered the Star-Lord system to begin scanning the statue. Once the location of Zoi's Soul Jade was pinpointed, Seong Xiang initiated a forced extraction. The statue's head cracked open and the Soul Jade flew free. At that exact moment, Lu Yen, who was standing right beneath the statue, noticed Seong Xiang extracting it. Seong Xiang recognized the new transfer student immediately. Could they have had some deeper connection in a past life? According to his memories, Lu Yan had transferred in on the very day the beast tide erupted. By sheer coincidence, they had even run into each other outside the girls' locker room, which resulted in a chaotic chase. Later, under President Gu's arrangement, Lu Yan became his classmate. But that night, the beast tide broke out. Lu Yan vanished without a trace. The next time they met, Lu Yan had become Test Subject 0 of the Milan Nation's artificial host program, appearing on the battlefield during the invasion of Tiandu. Eventually, he was rescued by another faction, joined their ranks, and ultimately died as a human hero. Seong Xiang never expected to encounter him again in this new timeline, yet Lu Yan casually called him 3-Minute Man, just like the other students. Irritated, Seong Xiang instantly blinked behind him and knocked him unconscious with a single palm strike. Based on his earlier deduction, if the Milan Nation had truly stolen Zuo Ci's Soul Jade, then Lu Yan must have been taken alongside it. The mass-produced Star Soul General Wu Chao that later appeared in the Milan Nation did bear a resemblance to the Zuo Ci statue. But now the Soul Jade was in Seong Xiang's possession and Lu Yan had been knocked unconscious. In this timeline, there would likely be no Test Subject 0. He might lose his destined rise as a hero, but he would also be spared the torment of forced enhancement experiments. This life, he'll just let him remain an ordinary student after storing Zuo Ci's Soul Jade in the system space. Seong Xiang decided it was time to rescue his classmates and teachers still locked in battle, though he wondered would showing up as Lu Bu be a little too flashy. Cut to a Taudi preparing to rip apart the Wei Yuan mech piloted by the class monitor Hai Yan. Fortunately, its claws were slowed again by the slowing array Seong Xiang had set earlier, giving Heian just enough time to react and block the attack. Without that delay, she wouldn't have lasted this long. Still, the gap in their strength was overwhelming. One more strike and she might not survive it. At that critical moment, several blasts of soul force struck the beast from behind. Irritated as if it were merely a scratch, the Taudi spun around only to see Seong Xiang making his entrance in a student model Wei mech. He had decided that rescuing his classmates as Lu Bu might be over the top, so he switched back to the Wei Yuan before arriving. After saving the class monitor from being devoured, he successfully drew the beast's full attention. Enraged, the Taudi lunged straight at him, but this was Seong Xiang reborn, with 60 years of battlefield experience. No alien beast was going to land a clean hit that easily. While dodging, he slashed backward, carving a deep wound into the monster's hide, then pivoted, creating 2 punctures across its throat. By the time the Taudi swiped in retaliation, it grasped nothing but a fading afterimage. Under Seong Xiang's relentless storm-like assault, the alien Taudi was battered into disarray. Then he charged power into his legs and leaped, cutting a clean arc through the air and punching a hole straight through the monster's skull. But a single-handed sword had its limits. Even after multiple strikes, the fight wasn't finished. A sly grin tugged at his lips as he asked the Star-Lord system, "Can you construct Lu Bu's Sky Piercer halberd Kitsujiao? Shu. A notification replied, "Funds handled separately." The moment the Sky Piercer, halberd Fangtian, materialized in his grasp, his presence surged. Class monitor Hai Yan stared stunned by the sheer size of the weapon, having endured what felt like endless scratching. The Taudi roared and lunged again. Seong Xiang met it head-on, halberd raised. With the new weapon equipped, it took only a single exchange. The savage alien Taudi was cleaved cleanly in half. That instant kill left Haiyan completely captivated. She didn't even react when he stepped closer and called out, "Class monitor." She looked almost smitten, standing there dazed, before she could even ask his name. He had already vaulted away. Only then did she blink back to awareness. That voice, why does it sound so familiar? And he called me class monitor. The scene shifted to the academy's dormitory district. Shangguan Yingqin was providing support from behind a turtle shell defensive formation formed by instructors and students. Yet in the next moment, she charged out to confront the Taudi herself. She had reason for her confidence even while piloting a training model Waymech. She tore through the swarm multiple times with lethal grace. Her classmates often said that once she entered combat, she slipped into a nearly maniacal state, and no one could pull her back. But no matter how strong she was still just a third-year student. After barely dodging one beast's attack, she was struck from behind by another, and the blow left her severely injured. Her recklessness had trapped her inside the Taudi encirclement cut off from reinforcements. The next second, one of the beasts opened its gaping maw, ready to tear her apart. At the last possible moment, a Wei Yuan-type mech, wielding the sky piercer halberd Fang Tian, dropped from above, hovering over her. The instant it landed, a crescent moon strike swept outward, erasing every enemy surrounding her. Watching this boss-level fighter mowing through enemies like weeds in a Musou game, the battle-crazed girl's heart went into overdrive as her face flushed tomato red. She couldn't stand the thought of him seeing her in such a humiliating state, so she forced herself upright. Then Seong Yong Xiang stepped forward to help her up, and that simple gesture sent her pulse racing even faster. She couldn't see his face through the mech, but even so, her voice softened without her even realizing it. Her classmates stared in disbelief. The notoriously fierce senior was suddenly acting so smitten in front of this powerhouse. Thankfully, the instructor kept a clear head and quickly directed the halberd-wielding ace to reinforce the main battle line. In an instant, Seong Yong Xiang charged back into the enemy ranks, striking left and right in rapid succession. The tied encirclement was torn apart like wet paper. Witnessing this turnaround, the instructor immediately ordered the students into a 10-unit anti-beast formation, the Eagle Strike formation, to shift from defense to offense. Everyone surged forward behind Seong Yong Xiang, except for one student, who remained frozen in place. After glancing around, he realized he was the real fool here. The instructor hadn't assigned him to the formation at all. The injured Shangguan Yingjian walked up behind him, still speaking in that uncharacteristically gentle tone, telling him to remain in the rear and provide support. Ironically, her softness only left him even more flustered. Meanwhile, inside the command center, the instructors were left completely speechless by what they were seeing. On the screen, Seong Yong Xiang piloted a Wei Yuan-type mech wielding the Sky Piercer halberd. On the battlefield, he looked like a god of war who had descended upon the mortal realm. Alien beasts that normally required 5 fighters to bring down were being sliced apart by him like vegetables on a cutting board. One strike, one kill. With only seconds of soul power remaining, he hurled the Sky Piercer halberd like a spear toward the final beast, then leaped after it himself, delivering the finishing blow in midair. At that moment, a system notification chimed. Soul power remaining 0%. Construct disengaging. As the mech dissolved, Seong Yong Xiang's true form was revealed to everyone. The students he had just saved were utterly shocked. The one who had rescued them was the very same Seong Yong Xiang they used to mock as the 3-Minute Man. The truth left them burning with embarrassment. In the command center, President Gu and her secretary were equally stunned. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. In that single battle, Seong Yong Xiang had personally slain 23 beasts and assisted in another 9 kills. Even the academy instructors couldn't match that level of combat power. If he was the one wielding the Sky Piercer halberd, then was the Star Soul General Lu Bu, who had been sweeping the battlefield earlier, also under his control. That thought reminded President Gu of the intel on Star Soul General Zuo. Legend had it that Zuo's mech could freely alter its appearance to deceive the world. Had Seong Yong Xiang already become Zuo's host? Was this the real reason the Yang family had pulled strings to force him into the academy? Filled with suspicion, President Gu immediately decided that once the beast tide ended, Seong Yong Xiang would be detained for questioning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the same Seong Yong Xiang who had been mocked as the 3-Minute Man had single-handedly driven back every beast. Now with his soul power depleted, he sat cross-legged on the spot, regulating his breathing. Not a single classmate behind him dared to approach. As he adjusted a recovery array with one hand, a third-year instructor finally asked for his name. He turned calmly and replied, Seong Yong Xiang, first-year class 10. The third-year students were stunned. A first-year this strong, and he was the same 3-Minute Man they used to joke about. That's impossible. But Shangguan Yingjian, the senior he had just saved, stepped forward to thank him. The moment he heard her name, Seong Yong Xiang froze. No way it couldn't be that much of a coincidence. In the future, she would become the host of Star Soul General Li. The Shangguan family, one of Tiandu's 4 great families, would defect during the war with Milong 5 years from now. This fierce woman had once been his enemy, pushing him into life-or-death situations multiple times. If not for sheer luck back then, he would have died by her hand. So without hesitation, Seong Yong Xiang grabbed her wrist, intending to copy the future Star Soul General Long Ji from her. The students behind them were dumbfounded. He actually dared to grab the fierce senior's hand just like that. No one saw that coming. Even Xiangwan Yingjian felt her cheeks heat up. Her thoughts spiraled wildly. Is he holding my hand to confess? But father said the Xiangwan family only accepts sons-in-law who marry into the family. Would junior Seong Yong even agree? At this rate, she was practically picking out their future family plot. Meanwhile, Seong Yong Xiang was focused solely on getting the Star-Lord system to copy Long Ki, hoping to eliminate a future threat in advance. But the system returned a failure notification. 2 possible reasons were given. First, the previous host of Long Ki had not yet died. Second, Long Ki had not yet manifested and currently had no host. Only then did Seong Yong Xiang recall that the Shangguan family would obtain the Long Ki Soul Jade during a secret realm expedition 10 months from now. Looks like he would have to wait. Snapping back to reality, he realized he'd been holding her hand for quite some time. The next second, he awkwardly let go of her hand and even asked if he'd hurt her. He looked completely unfazed, but Shangguan Yingqian wasn't. In those few eternal seconds, she had already picked out names for their future children. Seong Yong Xiang quickly explained, I've long admired your reputation, senior. That's why in Charlotte's Indian wider, I got a little carried away. I didn't mean anything by it. The excuse was so flimsy that not even the onlooking classmates were buying it. He then pulled out a bottle of soul-replenishing pills, popped one into his own mouth to restore his soul power, then generously offered her one as well. Already planning their wedding in her head, the senior extended her hand as if waiting for a ring. She even whispered softly, Junior Song, please be gentle. For a moment, Seong Yong Xiang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He simply asked her to turn her hand over. The moment she received the pill, Shangguan Yingqian recognized it. A soul-replenishing pill. The instructor beside them nearly lost his composure. Whoa, that's a real soul-replenishing pill. Just one of those is worth almost 10 months of my salary. Seong Yong Xiang, however, said calmly, it's for restoring your soul power. We'll need your strength for the fight, so recover quickly. She obediently swallowed it at once. Instantly, a vast surge of soul power flooded her body, feeling as if billions of stars had been poured into her very veins. It was an overwhelming rush. The quality far surpassed anything she'd ever taken before. This was definitely a top-grade pill. Seeing how incredible the effect was, the instructor couldn't help but hint that he could use one too. But Seong Yong Xiang refused, claiming he didn't have many left. That said, he had prepared something else for the group. With a wave of his right hand, a massive recovery array spread out, enveloping everyone. Everyone inside the array immediately felt their soul power recovery speed increase 5-fold. While they were still marveling at his generosity, Seong Yong Xiang announced he was heading to the training arena to reinforce the front lines, telling them to rest up. The moment he left, Shangguan Yingqian pulled out her soul talisman, ready to follow him. In the blink of an eye only, the instructor and the other students were left behind, fuming helplessly. Meanwhile, at the central training arena of the Mecha Martial Academy, Instructor OPE was directing Instructor Chong Yi to rotate in and support students who were running low on soul power. Together, they led the team to surround and eliminate an isolated beast, with several students launching feint attacks. They successfully divided the creature's attention, seizing the opening. Instructor OPE unleashed a fully charged strike and finished it off on the spot. Even though exhaustion was written all over her face, she still ordered the formation to expand and prepare for the next wave. Suddenly, several blinding streaks of light appeared in the sky, racing toward them at a terrifying speed. Instructor OPE immediately ordered everyone to scatter and evade, but it was too late. A barrage of explosions erupted, swallowing the entire squad in the blast from the beast's soul cannons. When the smoke finally began to clear, Instructor OPE realized the beast had adapted. They knew close combat meant being weakened by the mysterious array, so they retreated to long range to prepare for sustained artillery fire instead. Sure enough, a student shouted in alarm. The beasts were charging up again for another volley. Instructor OPE commanded the remaining members to disperse, warning them that their shields couldn't withstand that level of bombardment. The instant she finished speaking, another streak of light shot into the sky from behind them. A powerful strike descended, instantly killing one of the beasts mid-charge. As the light faded, a figure was revealed. Seong Yong Xiang had arrived. He stood alone, gripping the sky-piercer halberd, weaving through the beast's interlocking barrage like a phantom as he charged into the enemy lines all by himself. He had once again become the war god of Tiandu, harvesting the lives of beasts one after another. Instructor OPE quickly analyzed his technique. He was releasing controlled bursts of soul power from his feet, using them for propulsion while executing delicate footwork that let him glide in a semi-hovering state. The control required for such a maneuver was extraordinary. What was even more shocking was that he was piloting a training model Wei-type mech, yet wielding a massive Howard-class weapon. It was a combination no one had ever seen before. Right then, Instructor Ope had just one burning question. Who in the world was this powerhouse? Her squad members behind her were clearly wondering the exact same thing. We're all in basic training mechs, they thought. So how is this guy making us look like a top-tier S-class machine? Meanwhile, Seong Xiang effortlessly weaved his way across the battlefield, dodging a barrage of interlocking fire from the alien beasts. He moved with the effortless composure of a seasoned general, but then Instructor Ope froze. That footwork, it was the Black Armor Guard's most secret technique, 7 steps upon the stars. But what happened next left her even more stunned. Seong Xiang then launched into the air and unleashed the devastating Moonfall Slash. That was the signature move of the Martial Saint, one of the 8 great generals of Tiu, and he was pulling it off in a simple training mech. Just how powerful was this guy? Next to her, instructor Chung Yi was seriously considering asking to be his disciple. Reality, however, had other plans. The very same Shangguan Yingqian who'd become Seong Xiang's #1 fangirl earlier came rushing onto the scene yelling, "Seong Xiang, wait for me." The two instructors immediately started questioning all their life choices. Could this powerhouse really just be someone who happened to share a name with that so-called useless student? At that very moment, Seong Xiang finished off the last beast with a single decisive strike. The system announced once again that his soul power was completely depleted. Instructor Ope stormed over to him, ready to demand some answers about who he really was. But at that exact moment, his mech construct was forcibly disengaged, revealing a very familiar face. Both instructors recognized him in an instant. It was Seong Xiang, the very student who had been missing for the past 3 days. And there he stood with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The guy had just saved all their lives and hadn't received so much as a single thank you. Instead, he was immediately put on the spot and ordered to explain how he'd gotten so powerful. So much for playing the hero. He was being treated more like a criminal than a hero. Instructor Ope, perhaps a little shaken up that he'd just saved her life, kept pressing him about why he'd hidden his true strength since he enrolled. Sure, she was grateful, but she had to know if he was an ally or an enemy. Just as Seong Xiang was trying to figure out what to say, President Gu's personal mech descended right in front of them. The two instructors instantly disengaged their constructs and snapped into a salute. But President Gu paid them no mind, walking straight over to Seong Xiang. She started by thanking him on behalf of the entire academy. Her real concern, however, was why he'd hidden his abilities, and she made it clear she expected a good explanation. In his past life, Seong Xiang had been open about the Star-Lord system with the people he trusted. But President Gu was from the formidable Gu family of Tiandu, and he couldn't yet tell if she was an ally or a threat. Revealing his secret right now would be a huge mistake. But somehow President Gu seemed to read his mind in an instant. In the blink of an eye, she deployed a barrier array, completely sealing off the area to make sure no one could overhear their conversation. Clearly, she wasn't letting him leave without some answers. She spoke first. "Does your hidden strength have something to do with the Star Soul General Zuok? From what I've deduced, you pretended your soul veins were damaged. You used your family's connections to get into the academy through the back door, and your real goal was the Zuok Soul Jade. Isn't that right?" To be fair, her logic wasn't that far off. The Zuok Soul Jade was, in fact, in Seong Xiang's possession. Then President Gu stated bluntly, "Seong Xiang, drop the act. You're already Zuok's host, aren't you?" The figure that appeared in the West District was just Zuok's unique transformation ability. Seong Xiang was completely floored. What kind of crazy logic is that, he thought. Zuok can do that. I never even copied him in my past life. How was I supposed to know, he wondered, but she continued calmly. According to Tandu's historical records, Zuok can not only take on the appearance of other Star Soul generals, but can also replicate some of their abilities and techniques. He can even conceal a Star Soul Master's true cultivation level. Otherwise, it would be impossible for anyone to break through 3 minor realms in only a few days. The cultivation level you're showing right now is just an illusion, and it's one of the clearest pieces of proof that you are Zuok's host. After hearing that wildly elaborate theory, Seong Xiang almost started to believe it himself. But after a moment's thought, he decided, if that's what she wants to believe, then fine. I'll let Zuok take the blame for the Star-Lord system. The moment he decided to play along President Gu's imagination ran even wilder. She continued, her tone now almost leisurely. So your family's patriarch must have realized long ago that you were compatible with the Zuok Soul Jade. That's why he arranged for you to enroll here at the Mecha Martial Academy to wait for the right moment to claim it. Am I correct? If today's beast invasion hadn't forced your hand, you might have graduated 3 years from now, and no one would have ever discovered that Zuok had already fallen into your hands. At that point, the Song family could rely on Zui's power to rise again. Seong Yong Xiang was rendered speechless. Wow, thank you for writing my cover story for me. But she wasn't done. President Gu then brought up Tiandu's Star Soul General Administration regulations, stating that every inheritance had to be registered with the new Celestial Bureau. If the Song family had acted privately, it would be considered a violation, and in severe cases, even treason. Hearing that Seong Xiang was truly at a loss for words. Just when he thought he was about to be detained on the spot, President Gu instead proposed a deal. According to President Gu, the beast invasion was most likely triggered intentionally. She had already identified 3 suspected core activation points. The East District was being handled by a heaven-ranked powerhouse. She would personally lead the operation in the South District alongside the City Guard. As for the North District, that mission was assigned to Seong Yong Xiang. His task wasn't to suppress the core entirely, but to enter the Rift's center and rescue someone. If she's sending me, that person's identity can't be ordinary, he thought. And just as he expected, she revealed the target, Tiandu's second prince, Tian Zahai. In his previous life, the second prince had been a staunch warhawk, repeatedly advocating for preemptive strikes against the Milan nation. Back then, he supposedly died during this beast invasion. However, the official report claimed he was assassinated by a Taiwan assassin, which led to Asan being wrongfully hunted by Tiandu. But Seong Xiang knew the real story. Asan had never touched him. Could the Milan nation have been the real culprit? President Gu then made her offer clear. If Seong Xiang successfully rescued the second prince, the Academy would file the necessary registration with the new Celestial Bureau on his behalf. granting him legal possession of Zuosi and allowing him to keep his secrets buried in this new life. He reluctantly agreed. Still, he wondered would he run into Asen again in the North District. There was no time to dwell on it. He had a deal to fulfill. When Seong Xiang activated the Lubu mech, Chang'an Yingqin immediately insisted on going with him. In his previous life, her family had supported the second prince's militant stance. Before he could copy her Star Soul general, he needed to make sure she survived. It was better than letting her die by accident while with the president's team. But seeing how infatuated she was now, would she still grow into the formidable opponent he once faced? They say men and women working together makes things easier. Then why did Seong Yong Xiang feel like he was carrying the entire world on his back? He knew he wasn't weak. But with that crazy woman constantly pulling aggro behind him, she was basically trying to run him into the ground. He had no choice but to swallow his irritation and keep her in line until he could copy her Star Soul general. Making an enemy of her just wasn't an option. Fortunately, ever since he'd saved her, she followed his instructions almost without question. In theory, she could defend herself back at the Mecha Martial Academy even if he ignored her. But now that his rebirth was starting to alter history, keeping her close was safer. Still, an enemy far stronger than him might appear soon. He needed to teach her how to coordinate properly. Yet the moment she heard he needed help, she got a strangely suggestive look on her face and said shyly, "Junior, Song, whatever you want me to help with or whatever you want to do to me, I'm fine with it." Seong Yong Xiang felt his soul leave his body. Can I get a competent teammate for once? He wondered. Meanwhile, the situation for the second prince was deteriorating. Lu Shenwu, commander of the Royal Guards, had rushed into a trap to rescue others and was now gravely wounded. Tian Zahai was filled with guilt. He had originally received intelligence that agents from the Milan nation had infiltrated Tiandu. His plan was to lure them deeper, gather evidence, and then persuade his father to declare war. Instead, they had become the bait. Trapped by Milan operatives, the young prince anxiously demanded to know when reinforcements would arrive. The only response he received was, "They're on the way." Left with no other options, he ordered his maid to bring out the final revitalization pill, but she refused. That pill was reserved for the prince's personal use in an emergency. Even the severely wounded Commander Lu urged him not to waste it on him. But the second prince, both loyal and stubborn, snatched the pill. Ignoring their protests, he prepared to give it to Commander Lu. Suddenly a guard shouted, "Another beast ahead!" The soldiers immediately formed ranks, ready to die to protect the prince. As the Kangchi-type beast advanced, another guard reported beasts approaching from the opposite side. Was the second prince truly doomed? Meanwhile, at the East District Rift, several defensive squads watched from high ground as one man stood alone against a massive Kangchi-type beast. The bald middle-aged man stood there calmly, having not even started to assemble his mech. A rookie soldier asked his captain, "Why aren't we helping Elder Zhu?" The captain replied gravely, "Elder Zhu can tear beasts apart with his bare hands. With combat at that level, we'd better stay back, unless we want to get caught in the aftermath." Meanwhile, at the heart of the South District Rift, President Gu had in fact taken personal command. Judging by the scale of the forces she had assembled, one might think she was preparing for war with another nation. With that level of firepower, even if a powerful Kangchi-type beast were to emerge from the rift, it would likely be filled with arrows in no time. Compared to the other two rift corps, the North District's fighting force was clearly the weakest. Only a handful of royal guards stood there facing down beasts that were emerging from both sides. Seeing the desperate situation, one guard urged the maid Jia to escort the prince away while they held the line. Even the heavily wounded Commander Leo insisted they retreat, claiming he could still buy the prince 20 breaths of time, but the second prince simply told him not to panic. The aura approaching from behind didn't feel like a beast's, and sure enough, from within the mist, a weapon came tearing through the air. It slammed into the ground right in front of the Changshi-type creature. As the beast hesitated, Seong Yong Xiang stepped out from the fog of war. To the guards, it was as if salvation itself had arrived. The reinforcement was none other than Seong Yong Xiang, wielding a Star Soul general. Seizing the brief opening, he ordered Shangwan Yingqin to extract the rift crystal from the beast's body. He said he would need it soon. Before the words had even settled, he was already drawing the beast's aggro again. Facing an enemy 3 whole realms above him, he had no choice but to bend the rules a little. Using a soul prison array, he temporarily restrained the creature. The second prince quickly realized that the newcomer was stalling for time with array techniques. Yet even as a prince, he had never seen someone integrate an array into a weapon and launch it just like that. Meanwhile, the maid was closely observing Shangwan Yin's actions. On the display, she watched her pull a purple crystal from the beast's corpse. The second prince recognized it immediately. A priceless rift crystal, also known as a spatial stone. It was said that they grow within the stomach pouches of Tutet-type beasts, granting them space compression abilities that allow them to swallow objects many times their own size. They are a primary material for storage talismans and Mexol talismans. It was classified as a strictly controlled strategic resource that was rarely ever seen on the market. And yet the maid assumed that Seong Yong Xiang was merely stalling for time to line his own pockets. What she couldn't possibly imagine was that the crystal had another far deadlier use. The soul prison array was draining his soul power at a terrifying rate. Seong Yong Xiang had no choice but to keep swallowing soul-replenishing pills to sustain it. Fortunately, Shangwan Yangqin had secured 3 spatial stones. It wasn't many, but it was enough. In the next instant, he seized the stones with his soul power and hurled them toward the Kangchi-type beast. He then briefly locked eyes with the second prince down below. Then he leapt from his scarlet flame dragon steed. His sky-piercer halberd returned to his grasp in midair. At the same time, the array dissipated. the beast immediately fired a beam of soul energy at him, which he twisted aside from effortlessly. The creature's left arm morphed into a scythe, slashing toward him in the air. Seong Yong Xiang met it head-on with his halberd. Their clash illuminated the entire night sky. In those fleeting seconds of close combat, he maneuvered the spatial stones into position right beside the beast. A moment later, its brute force sent him flying. He crashed through multiple buildings in a row before he barely managed to regain his balance. At the peak of the yellow rank, even while wielding Lubu, he couldn't overpower a Chongi beast comparable to a heaven-ranked powerhouse. But he was no reckless rookie anymore. With a thunderous shout, the spatial stones he had hidden beside the beast detonated violently, and the explosion obliterated half of its body. Enraged and frightened, the beast summoned lesser creatures to swarm him. They stood no chance. Within moments, he cut them all down, just as the beast fired another soul beam. While it was immobilized during the attack, Seong Yong Xiang closed in and struck at point-blank range, and his sky-piercer halberd shattered from the impact. A cold sweat ran down Seong Yong Xiang's back. At his current level, his body simply couldn't match the Kongi's brute strength, but he didn't need to overpower it. He only needed a wound, large enough to fit a spatial stone into. The second explosion tore away the other half of its body. Enraged, the Kung-Chi charged like a maddened beast as it opened its jaws to swallow him whole. Seong Yong Xiang prepared his final move. He thrust his right hand along with a spatial stone straight into its mouth. Then he detonated the stone with his soul power from within its jaws. A blinding violet flash erupted. The entire beast was annihilated, leaving nothing behind. Unfortunately, the Kyongi crystal inside it was destroyed too. Otherwise, he could have made another fortune. The battle had barely ended when the royal guards quickly formed ranks to greet him. In a bit of typical royal theatrics, the second prince formally thanked him for his help. Seong Xiang politely replied, asking if they were all right. But the second he addressed the prince by name, the guards tensed up, clearly worried about the prince's identity being exposed. He quickly explained that President Gu had sent him, which immediately eased the tension. During their chat, the second prince learned he was Seong Xiang, a student at Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy. That rang a bell. He'd heard rumors about the Song family pulling strings to enroll a disciple with crippled soul veins. That had to be him. Having seen him take down the cross realm, the prince was already figuring out how to get him on his side. Seong Xiang saw right through it, but he had bigger fish to fry in this life, so he just let it go. Just then, Commander Lo's condition got worse. His coughing became severe, and the Academy's medical team was still at least another 45 minutes out. Thinking about future alliances, Seong Xiang decided to save him and earn a favor in the process. Using medical knowledge from his past life, he quickly diagnosed the commander with shattered soul veins. Without proper soul circulation, there was no way he could heal on his own. With no advanced treatment on hand, the only choice was to give him a revitalization pill to keep him alive. The second prince pointed out that he had already given Commander Lo one revitalization pill. Taking another one probably wouldn't help much. Seong Xiang calmly corrected him. I said a little, not just one. If one pill doesn't work, then try a whole bottle. He left another bottle with the maid telling her to give the commander a pill every so often. That should keep Commander Lu alive, until the medical team finally arrived. The second prince had probably never seen such an outrageously generous use of medicine in his life. Meanwhile, over in the Eastern District, Elder Su stood calmly before the beast. Among Nanzhou's top soul masters, he was one of the very closest to reaching Saint rank. Even though he was only a half step into Saint rank, a simple heaven rank beast was no match for him. Even in an old mass-produced mech, he could slay it all by himself. He raised his short blade and started to charge his soul power, condensing into a sword aura dozens of meters long. With a simple downward slash, the aura stretched for miles. This was the third form of the 10,000-mile sword. A single slash to shatter mountains and rivers. The heaven rank beast simply vanished inside the raging vortex of soul power. As the Yanding city guards stared in awe at the instant kill, they realized Elder Su was gone. On a nearby rooftop, a group of Milan operatives were getting ready to retreat. Their plan had failed, but they were suddenly intercepted by Elder Su. One of them immediately recognized him as the man who had just taken down the beast. Their captain started to assemble his mech to fight back, but a slipper came flying through the air and smacked him right into a wall. The others were stunned and quickly taken out by a barefoot Elder Su. After dealing with the last one, he grabbed the captain like a sack of potatoes and leaped across the rooftops with him. In the southern district, the beasts were completely overwhelmed and beaten down under President Gu's command. It just goes to show, no matter how skilled you are, numbers always count. While everyone else was celebrating their victory, President Gu noticed Elder Su suddenly appear. He handed over the captured operative, explaining he suspected a leak in the Intelligence Bureau and City Guard. He insisted that she handle the investigation personally. Then he turned his gaze toward the North District. Something interesting over there had caught his attention. The question was it the second prince or the mysterious Seong Xiang? Meanwhile, the second prince was still looking at the soul-replenishing pill Seong Xiang had given him. It was completely different from the ones he'd taken before. Its quality was incredible peak grade, maybe even close to saint grade. On top of that, the alchemical patterns showed a refining method he had never even heard of. This technique could be decades ahead of Tandu's current standards. And if the effect was even a little bit stronger, he never got to finish that thought because Commander Lo's wounds started healing right before their eyes. When Commander Lo woke up, he described a dream where he felt like he was floating in a warm, renewing current, as if bathing in a sea of light. He felt reborn. His battle injuries were gone. Even the chronic back pain he'd had for years from training had vanished. Mijia noticed the wrinkles and gray hairs on his face were fading. A man who once looked to be in his 40s now barely looked 30. Was this all thanks to Seong Xiang's pill? The second prince was already impressed by his fighting ability, but now he realized there might be an alchemy grandmaster backing him. This was someone he absolutely had to win over, just as he was plotting his next move. Shangguan Yingqian returned carrying a pile of spatial stones, which instantly made his Saint Grade pill seem like nothing special. 9 intact rift crystals. The prince was immediately intrigued. At first, the prince declared them strategic resources not to be casually traded, only to promptly offer to purchase them all. Seong Xiang had been planning to offer a slight discount to secure their long-term cooperation. Unfortunately for him, Shangguan Ying was part of the prince's faction. To make matters worse, her second brother served directly under him, so the 6-unit price Seong Yong Xiang was hoping for got negotiated down to 5. The prince sweetened the deal by promising Shangguan Yingqian's brother 3 quick promotions. Seeing how delighted she was, Seong Yong Xiang couldn't bring himself to refuse. Then the prince pulled the limited budget card asking for a favor. With the two of them working together, Seong Xiang finally gave in. Still, the maid held onto the storage card, refusing to budge. She even cheekily suggested that Shangguan Yingqian could just harvest the crystals herself, since they were practically family. Commander Lo, however, sensed there was more to it. Getting intact rift crystals required a very specific killing method. To have so many at once meant Seong Yong Xiang must have mastered that technique. Only then did the maid reluctantly release the funds. As the deal was finalized, the second prince found himself thinking about the Song family's history. They were once one of Tiandu's 4 great families, and their former patriarch was one of the 8 generals. 20 years ago, they even produced a genius who completely dominated his era, only to fall from grace after a scandal involving a woman, which led to their exile to the southern frontier wall. But now, with Seong Yong Xiang on the rise, perhaps the Song family could reclaim its former glory. The money and goods were exchanged. The second prince was just about to order his guards to transport the rift crystals. Being a top-tier merchant, Seong Xiang immediately decided to throw in free shipping. Everyone knows that rift crystals can't be put into storage talismans because of their unique spatial properties. What they didn't expect was for Seong Yong Xiang to use a cutting-edge spatial array to compress the crystals first, allowing him to store them safely inside. Making his customers haul away goods worth that much just wasn't his style. Of course, the move was also a little flashy on purpose as he and Shangguan Yingqian prepared to leave. The second prince solemnly declared that he now owed Seong Yong Xiang a personal favor. If he ever needed anything, all he had to do was ask. Seong Yong Xiang returned the courtesy with a polite smile, thinking to himself, "This favor will definitely come in handy soon, and I won't waste it." After they parted ways, he began to reflect on things. The beast tide incident seemed to be over. He hadn't sensed Asha's presence near the prince, which meant she had likely escaped Yuanding City successfully. With that matter settled, it was finally time to head home. In his past life, both the Mecha Martial Academy and Yuanding City were completely destroyed in this very beast tide. He had fled south, with the other refugees taking a detour through the Desert of Death. It took him over 20 days to get back to the Song family. And yet, less than a month after that, the southern frontier they were guarding was swallowed up by an even larger beast tide. The Song soldiers and the defenders of Yongan City were almost completely wiped out. The old patriarch, his siblings, they all died there, and he was powerless, forced to escape all alone once again. During his escape in his previous life, he ran into the Black Armor Guard reinforcements and was saved by that female master. This time around, there were still 2 full months before that disaster was set to unfold. There was still plenty of time to change everything. His train of thought was shattered when he sensed a powerful aura closing in fast. Without a second thought, he lashed out with a kick. As the dust settled, a bald man wearing slippers emerged. Seong Yong Xiang's sudden attack made the second prince tense up instantly. That presence, it was far beyond the heaven rank. Commander Lo muttered under his breath, "This man, he's likely just a step away from the saint rank." From within the smoke, Elder Su spoke, his voice cold and thick with killing intent. "You hide your abilities well, boy. A mere peak yellow rank, and yet you were able to sense me." Seong Yong Xiang replied calmly, "A grandmaster of the heavenly realm, working as a simple gatekeeper at the Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy." "I'd say that makes us even. One of the Academy's 7 legends, a rotating president, but also its unmovable gatekeeper. That would be you, Elder Su." He cupped his fist respectfully. Junior Seong Yong Xiang greets Elder Su. Elder Su. Su Hemming, the foremost of Nanzhou's 3 great swordsmen known as the 10,000-mile sword. He reached the heaven rank at 30 and rose to fame with his signature strike a single slash that could shatter mountains and rivers. He once traveled thousands of miles alone just to reinforce the northern front, slicing 3 aerial warships right out of the sky and destroying hundreds of enemy mechs, completely turning the tide of battle. Rumor has it, he achieved the great perfection of the heaven rank over 20 years ago. Yet he was bound by the ancient saying, "None but the chosen may ascend to the saint rank." So he spent decades walking the mortal world, tempering his heart and seeking a way to break through that ceiling, not just for himself, but to carve a path to the saint rank for all the ordinary star soul masters who lacked an innate destiny. That was the strange part. If Elder Su truly was President Gu's hidden trump card, then without Seong Yong Xiang's intervention, she should have sent him to rescue the second prince immediately. A half-saint was practically invincible below saint rank. So why had the prince died here in his past life in this world? Becoming the host of a Star Soul general meant being chosen by one of the 108 primordial Star Souls created by the gods. It was said that once awakened, a host could ascend directly to Saint rank, as long as their cultivation kept pace, of course. Ordinary Star Soul masters who wielded artificial imitations were shackled by the laws of heaven and earth. Their cultivation progressed far slower, and invisible barriers suppressed their advancement. For thousands of years, not a single commoner had broken through to Saint rank. Heaven rank was already the limit for mortals. Heaven rank. Great perfection was the absolute ceiling achieved only through extreme talent and relentless effort, and Elder Su stood precisely at that peak. To everyone around him, he was respectfully known as Su, the half-saint. A thought flickered through Seong Xiang's mind. The Eastern continent had yet to establish a systematic path for mortals to break through to Saint rank. If he applied the techniques he had learned in his past life to cultivate a Saint rank army, wouldn't he dominate an entire era? And the man standing before him, wasn't he the perfect test subject? Excellent. Elder Su would become the first experimental subject of the Mortal Saint Army project. At the same time, Elder Su noticed the strange glint in Seong Xiang's eyes. A faint sense of unease rose in his chest. Seong Xiang scratched his head awkwardly. Ahem, senior, you're overthinking it. The only thing in my eyes is boundless admiration for a legendary half-saint like you. Inwardly, he thought, as expected of an old fox tempered by decades in the mortal world. He even caught that. Elder Su narrowed his eyes. Drop the act, boy. I heard from that girl Gu. You're the host of Zuoqi. Even if you wield the Star Soul General Zuoqi with only yellow rank peak cultivation, you shouldn't be able to slay a heaven-ranked beast. Crossing 3 major realms to kill an opponent above your level. How did you do it? Or are you hiding your true strength? Perhaps your cultivation isn't merely yellow rank peak. Or does the Song family harbor some secret the world doesn't know? With Elder Su's remark, the second prince finally connected the dots. No wonder the Lu Bu mech he had seen earlier wasn't in its usual color scheme. Seong Xiang's lips curved into a sly smile. Since they were already thinking along those lines, he might as well let Zuoqi take the blame for the Star-Lord system one more time. Believing he had uncovered the truth, the second prince felt even more grateful, convinced that Seong Xiang had revealed his host identity just to save him. Still, everyone remained fixated on one question. How exactly had he killed a heaven-ranked beast across 3 major realms? Fine, he would come clean partially. After hearing his explanation, they were all stunned. Even when rift crystals were processed in industrial furnaces, nothing like that had ever occurred. Seong Xiang spoke calmly. It's not as simple as just burning it. I inscribed arrays onto the rift crystal beforehand, then catalyzed it using alchemical refinement techniques, reversing its structural attributes and triggering a spatial collapse. The second prince stared in disbelief. So it involved arrays and alchemy working together. No wonder it's impossible to replicate. He had briefly considered learning the technique for future battles. Now he knew the idea was completely unrealistic. Just as the group was deep in conversation, Seong Xiang suddenly sensed a surge of presences closing in. They had already formed a complete encirclement. Miluo spies again. Their objective was obvious: assassinate the second prince of Tiandu. What exactly had he done to earn such relentless hatred? The group immediately extended their senses to estimate the enemy's numbers. Elder Su, however, kept his attention on Seong Xiang. What he discovered surprised him. Song's perception was sharper than his own. Even he hadn't detected the hidden heaven rank operative among the enemy ranks. Seong Xiang pinpointed the presence within seconds. The enemy didn't waste any time. The heaven rank captain's mech issued the command, target locked. They were seconds away from being reduced to ash. Under Mage Helm's direction, the Imperial Guard switched into a shield formation, prepared to die protecting their prince. And of course, Seong Xiang wasn't just standing idle. He flicked 2 soul talismans into the air. Defensive barriers instantly formed above the 2 key figures. Then he hurled a 3rd talisman high overhead. Another layer of protection expanded over everyone just in case. Even Elder Su was stunned. He had never seen anyone casually deploy 3 level 5 defensive arrays in rapid succession. Before Su could fully process it, Seong Xiang tossed something toward him. Elder Su, take this. I'll leave those 2 under your protection. Watch out for the hidden expert. Elder Su caught what Seong Xiang had thrown. One glance inside the bottle was enough to stun him all over again. Unfortunately, the enemy wasn't about to give them time for a chat. At their captain's command, they unleashed a full-on barrage. The second prince's location was instantly swamped with artillery fire from all sides. Once the first wave died down, Xiaowei whipped around to check on the prince. He was completely unharmed, and even more shockingly, the defensive array Seong Xiang had put up was actually absorbing the incoming soul beam fire. Talk about overpowered. Using that brief opening, Seong Xiang stepped right out of the protected zone. That heaven-ranked captain mech is all yours, he told Commander Lu. Without missing a beat, Lu assembled his Imperial Guard captain mech. According to the enemy's intel, Lu had been badly hurt earlier and should have been at his limit. Feeling pretty confident in that assessment, the opposing captain accepted a one-on-one duel without a second thought. Their weapons met with a thunderous clash. In the meantime, the rest of the enemy troops started searching for Seong Yong Xiang. Just as one soldier was transmitting his coordinates, as Seong Yong Xiang piloting the Lu Bu mech suddenly popped up right behind him. It was time to give them a proper lesson in the art of assassination. The techniques he'd learned from Asen and Taiwan in his past life were finally about to be put on full display. The sudden ambush threw the enemy ranks into total chaos. Gunfire erupted everywhere, making it impossible to tell friend from foe. Before they could even switch to close combat mode, Seong Xiang had already zipped right into their midst. One clean slash split a mech right down the middle. A horizontal sweep took down another in an instant. The next soldier had barely recovered from the ghost-like movement before he was cut down, weapon and all. Still, you had to hand it to them. Every single one was Earth rank, and their armor was way sturdier than TN's. For someone at the peak of Yellow rank, keeping up this pace was draining. At the same time, Commander Lo was still locked in a fierce battle with Milan's Heaven rank captain. But watching his men fall one by one was clearly shaking the captain's focus, and Lu, as a Heaven rank expert, would never let an opening like that go to waste. Commander Lo unleashed his special technique, Kylan Tail Sweep. The explosive strike slammed into the enemy mech, leaving some very visible damage. The second prince could now see it plain as day. Seong Yong Xiang was even more deadly in mech versus mech combat than he had been against the beasts. His kill speed was just terrifying. Nearly every single move was a finishing blow. What was even more impressive, though, was that he deliberately left certain enemies alive, probably to have some witnesses for interrogation later. Seeing the tide of battle turn, the second prince immediately ordered full support for Seong Yong Xiang. The Imperial Guard switched to long-range artillery mode in perfect sync. A barrage of suppressive fire rained down on the enemy ranks. Under that cover, Seong Yong Xiang charged straight into the enemy's rear formation. One move, falling leaf, slash. The soldiers hiding behind cover were all taken out in a single sweep. The second prince had watched every single second of it, completely stunned. It turns out Seong Song had been using the Black Armor Guard's 7 steps upon the stars movement technique this whole time, a technique only elite members were allowed to learn. The Black Armor Guard had been around for years, but its golden age was about 20 years ago, thanks to the 6 Black Armor elites. Their leader, Song Long, had reached Heaven rank at just 18 years old. Seong Yong Xiang was also from the Song family. Could there be a connection? Sadly, the other 5 all perished in the Imperial Mausoleum War. The position of Supreme Commander then stayed vacant for 7 years before it was inherited by the current female commander, Dan. She's known for her absolute neutrality and never gets involved in faction politics. And yet just moments ago, the prince had clearly seen Seong Xiang use her signature technique, the Moonfall Slash. Could the Song family have secret ties to the Black Armor Guard? If he could just get the Song family on his side, maybe the Guard wouldn't stay so strictly neutral on the battlefield anymore. Meanwhile, as Seong Yong Xiang continued to hunt down the remaining enemy soldiers, the Imperial Guards around the prince switched from defense to offense, providing steady, long-range support. Even Elder Su was busy studying the defensive arrays Seong Xiang had set up. And that momentary distraction was all it took for 2 enemy soldiers to slip right past them. One was instantly pinned to the ground by the Sky Piercer halberd that Seong Xiang hurled clear across the field. But with only one weapon in hand, he couldn't take out both at once. The remaining soldier raised his massive blade high overhead. He planned on taking out the seemingly harmless old man first. His blade came crashing down, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. What he never ever expected was that this ordinary old man was none other than Su Half-Saint, the foremost of Tendu's 3 swords. He didn't even need a mech with his bare hands. He caught the full-force strike of an Earth-ranked Star Soul Master. The enemy soldier just froze in disbelief. Who in the world blocks a Star Soul General's attack with their bare hands? Elder Su slowly began to gather his soul power. It was time. Just his aura alone, an aura infinitely close to Saint rank, was more than enough to scare that poor grunt so badly he looked like he was about to twist himself into a pretzel. The moment the enemy froze, Elder Su sprang into action, launching a savage kick right at him. The powerful blow instantly shattered one of the Star Soul General's arms. Immediately after, soul power surged into Elder Su's right hand, and with one fierce motion, he ripped off the enemy's other arm. Even the Imperial Guards on the sidelines were shaken, watching Elder Su dismantle a mech with his bare hands. They were honestly worried that if he got too carried away, he might start taking them apart next. Even Seong Xiang had to admit it. The old man really knew how to put on a show. He was deliberately avoiding the mech's heavy armor, aiming only for its fragile joints. It was all to create the shocking spectacle of him taking apart a mech with his bare hands. He was most likely trying to bait the heaven-ranked powerhouse hiding in the shadows to show themselves. And just as he'd planned, the enemy squad leader who was busy fighting Commander Lu realized he stood no chance of winning. He suddenly threw his clasped hands to the sky and begged for their hidden holy envoy to intervene. At that exact moment, a crimson figure appeared atop a nearby skyscraper. So this was the holy envoy, a woman with a bullhead mask and a very curvy figure who was the real reason the second prince died here in his past life. She was an inspector from the Pingchen Sacred Sect, a group widely known as a demonic sect. Even the second prince looked tense since that sect controlled over half of the military and political power in the Milan nation. According to Seong Xiang's memories from his previous life, the strongest fighters on the eastern continent were 2 god-ranked patriarchs, both of whom had lived for more than 400 years. One supported the Milan nation and the other backed the Shishu nation. 400 years ago, after the Eastern Heavenly Emperor vanished without a trace, King Miles seized the opportunity propping up the late emperor's illegitimate son as a puppet to rule from behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the eldest imperial princess, Princess Sishui, carved out the 3 eastern provinces, founded the Siwi nation, and declared herself empress. But once that illegitimate son grew up, he unexpectedly teamed up with the Sichu nation, defeated King Mile, and eventually established the modern-day Tu. As for King Mile, just as he was on the verge of death, he was saved by a god-ranked powerhouse. With that person's help, the modern-day Milan nation was founded. and that god-ranked figure who saved King Mile was none other than the Pingchen Patriarch. Founder of the Pingchen Sacred Sect, a terrifying old monster rumored to have lived for over 4 centuries. But that's exactly what made this so strange. The Pingchen Sacred Sect's cautious moderate faction was aligned with Tiandu. They had never supported the Milan nation's military expansion. And during the final battle for Tiandu City, in his previous life, that god-ranked patriarch never made a move either. Could something have changed within the Milan nation? Something even Seong Yong Xiang didn't know about. Just then, the holy envoy gave a sinister smile and pulled a red soul talisman from her chest. The next second, she leaped straight off the rooftop and began constructing her Star Soul General mech in midair. But just as the mech was about to finish forming, she suddenly vanished from the sky. Commander Lu didn't even have time to react before a massive explosion erupted right beside him. Even though he was also heaven-ranked, Commander Lu was crushed in a single blow. And in that moment, Seong Xiang recognized the mech she was piloting. It was actually the Milan nation's next-generation mass-produced unit named Yai. But by all rights, that model shouldn't have appeared this early. After easily defeating Commander Lo, the holy envoy immediately turned and charged straight for the second prince. Facing this terrifying witch, Elder Su finally pulled out his mech soul talisman. He was done playing around. Soon the two clashed head-on for the first time, and the battle between an old-generation machine and a next-generation unit officially began. Relying purely on the superior performance of her next-generation mech, the curvy witch actually overwhelmed Elder Su. The man hailed as the greatest of Tu's 3 swords, right from the very first exchange, leaving him almost no room to fight back. The shockwaves from their clash were so violent that everyone nearby could barely keep their footing. The soul power storm exploding in all directions was so brutal that even the 2 level 5 defensive arrays Seong Xiang had set up in advance started showing cracks. Fortunately, before the arrays shattered completely, Seong Xiang had already reached the others. A battle on this level was far beyond even his ability to interfere with. The only thing he could do for now was get the second prince and senior Shangguan to a safe distance and figure out their next move. After confirming their safe retreat, Elder Su finally went all out. With a powerful burst from his legs, he sent the witch flying backward in a single strike. But using the opening from the recoil, she flicked 2 throwing knives toward the direction Seong Xiang was retreating. It's a good thing Seong Xiang's movement technique was so slick otherwise that strike might have actually hit him. But Elder Su was distracted for just a split second as he glanced towards Seong Xiang, and the witch immediately seized the opportunity, kicking him into the air. He skidded a long way across the ground before barely managing to regain his footing. Just as Elder Su was searching for his vanished opponent, the witch suddenly appeared behind him, ready to end the fight with a strike from the rear. Luckily, Elder Su was a battle-hardened veteran. In an instant, he executed a reverse sword thrust directly behind him. Seeing this, the witch had no choice but to slash her saber sideways, forcibly changing both their trajectories to create a little distance. But Elder Su had no intention of letting such a rare, close-range opportunity slip away. He forcibly twisted his body, determined to stay right on top of her. Unfortunately, her mech's performance was simply on another level. In the blink of an eye, she vanished from right in front of him. She not only dodged his attack, but also landed with pinpoint precision right behind him, using the opportunity to land another kick. After recalling her twin blades, the witch's aura surged once more, and she immediately shot toward Elder Su after kicking him away. But as she closed in, she realized Elder Su had been charging up a finishing move the whole time, just waiting for her to walk right into his trap. In the next moment, a massive surge of golden soul power erupted into the sky. It was a move Elder Su had originally reserved for a certain saint-rank Star Soul General. He never imagined he'd have to use it today just to take down a witch like her. Honestly, it felt like a waste. At that moment, the short blade in her hand began to crack and disintegrate piece by piece. The soul power initially fired as a single concentrated blast split into several streams of energy, all homing in on the witch. Even with her next-generation mech, there was no way she could evade a tracking soul power bombardment like this. With a sharp scream from the witch, the multiple golden energy beams converged back into one before slamming violently into the ground. Just when everyone thought the battle was over, a black silhouette emerged once more from the smoke that covered the battlefield. As expected of a next-generation mass-produced Star Soul General from the Milan nation, the mech had actually managed to withstand Elder Su's world-shattering strike head-on. Its mobility far surpassed the Tandu Waiwan-type mech, and its armor was even stronger than the Milan nation's own Ufulu model. Although that last strike had definitely injured the witch quite badly, it was clear she was still holding something back. The moment she entered a string of mysterious code into the mech's control panel, the heavily damaged machine instantly repaired itself to perfect condition and erupted with soul power fluctuations that were even stronger than before. Even the second prince watching from afar could feel that this pressure completely overwhelmed Elder Su. But Seong Xiang recognized it immediately. This was the Heavenly Demon Disintegration mode developed by the Milan nation. So the Pingchen Sacred Sect had actually installed that system into this prototype unit. No wonder the second prince couldn't escape his fate in the previous timeline. At that moment, Elder Su, having just unleashed his ultimate move, was still trying to recover when the witch suddenly vanished before his eyes. By the time he spotted her again, one of his mech's arms had already been severed. Before Elder Su could even react, he was kicked into the air once more. And while he was still airborne, the witch reappeared behind him. Without giving him a moment to respond, she juggled him through the sky like a soccer ball. Elder Su never expected her speed to increase so dramatically. To survive, he had to find a way to counterattack. But just as he finally managed to grab the witch's thigh, she used his own body as leverage to drive her blade straight through his mech in a single smooth motion. Even so, Elder Su showed terrifying grit. Despite his severe injuries, he refused to let go of her leg. But by now, the witch had gone completely berserk. She raised her blade, aiming to bring it straight down on Elder Su's head, and not even someone as strong as a half-step saint like him could withstand such a blow. With the mech critically damaged, its construct system started to automatically disengage, leaving Elder Su in nothing but his mortal body as he crashed hard from the sky to the ground. After suffering one devastating blow after another, he could only use the last of his strength to fumble for something in his pocket, slowly pulling out the super realm pill Seong had given him earlier. This had originally been one of Seong Xiang's trump cards. For anyone below Earth rank taking it, could forcibly raise their cultivation by an entire major realm for a short period of time. Given Elder Su's half-step Saint realm, the medicine's effect would definitely be heavily weakened. But if it was only enough to push him up by one minor stage for a short time, that should still be more than possible. In that case, this was perfect. Elder Su could test it for Seong Xiang and find out whether the super realm pill actually worked on a half-step saint stuck at a bottleneck like him. But the moment Elder Su swallowed the super realm pill Seong had left for him, he suddenly felt his entire consciousness slip straight into his inner world. And for Elder Su, the deepest obsession blocking his path to Saint rank was actually a memory from more than 30 years ago. Back then, he was already the foremost of Nanzhou's three swords, yet he still suffered a crushing defeat in Kwancheng of the Shui nation. He was blasted straight down from a 100 Janghai wall in utter humiliation. In those days, he had still been a long-haired, devastatingly handsome young man. As a mere mortal, he had already reached mid-stage heaven rank at the age of 33, a talent that could only be called monstrous. And the ones who had traveled with him to the Shui nation that time were the other two members of Nanzhou's three swords. One was Gu Ying, who had reached early-stage heaven rank at 30. The other was Hikun, who had done the same at 34. The moment they saw their big brother Su Himing beaten into such a miserable state, Gu Ying and Hikun immediately moved to step in. After all, when Nanzhou's three swords had sworn brotherhood back then, they had made a vow. If they could not live together, then they would at least die together. Elder Su was naturally moved by that loyalty. But the enemy standing before them was simply far too overwhelming. Not only was she the host of the Star Soul General W. Jiang, she was also holding Su Himing's beloved Hong Suni captive in her hands. Seeing the situation for what it was, Gu Ying and Hikun immediately constructed their mechs and faced off against her. But that move clearly displeased her. She casually fired a few soul power beams, and just like that, both of their mechs were blasted into forced disengagement. In the blink of an eye, the pressure she released nearly crushed all three of them straight into the ground. As one of the four Saint rank pillars safeguarding the Shui nation, Huang Miao, Ying was never an opponent a few mortals like them could hope to resist. At that moment, Huang Miao Ying stepped out from beside the star coffin and looked down coldly at the three men below. Su had indeed been a once-in-a-generation genius, who stepped into heaven rank at 30, but in her eyes, everything below Saint rank was nothing but insects. Killing the three of them would have taken no more than the lift of a hand. Fortunately, Hong Suni kept pleading for mercy at the side. Otherwise, Nanzhou's three swords would likely have all fallen there that day. After all, Hong Suni possessed the rare inborn host physique, a once-in-a-century talent and someone of immense importance to the Hong family. And yet, on that very day, Elder Su had actually tried to elope with her. That was no different from trampling directly on the Hong family's pride. But Huang Miao Ying was also worried that killing the three of them on the spot would leave an indelible heart demon inside Hong Suni. So she proposed a deal instead. The terms were simple. If the three of them willingly left and swore never to step into the Shui nation again, then she would spare their lives that day. Hearing such a humiliating condition, Elder Su flew into a rage and yanked out his saber, raising it behind his head, then cut off a lock of his own hair before everyone's eyes. With that, he swore that no matter how long it took, he would find a path for mortals to step into Saint rank. And until the day he broke through, he would never again set foot in the Shui nation. But when that day finally came, when he entered Saint rank, that would be the day he returned to Shui to formally ask for Hong Suni's hand. He then swore to the heavens once more that one day he would shatter that 100 Janghai wall, take the woman he loved, and free her from the Hong family's prison. Hearing those words, Hong Suni broke down in tears and said to her beloved, "All right, I'll wait for you." As Elder Su recalled those words, now golden light suddenly burst from his eyes, because today might truly be the day he had waited decades for. The day he finally stepped into Saint rank. The day his dream came true. He never imagined that a simple promise from years ago would be the very miracle that propelled him to Saint rank. Watching from afar, Seong Jiang knew Elder Su's Saint rank power was just a temporary boost from the super realm pill. He also knew it wouldn't last long, but even so, this moment proved something crucial. The long-held belief that only a host could reach Saint rank wasn't an absolute rule after all. It turned out that an external force could break that barrier too. From this day forward, the line between saint and mortal would no longer be the ultimate limit for a star soul master. When the time was right, Seong Jiang planned to teach Elder Su some true transcendent cultivation arts. After all, he had collected plenty of techniques like that from the central and southern continents in his past life. There had to be at least one technique perfect for Elder Su. And now that Elder Su had reached the first layer of Saint Rank, he finally understood what Huang Miao Yuing meant when she said, "Below Saint Rank, all are ants." The gap between Heaven Rank and Saint Rank was simply that absurd. Right now, the witch was in the same boat Elder Su had been in before, pinned down by an overwhelming pressure, completely unable to move. She knew she had to interrupt his breakthrough while she had the chance. But her body just wouldn't move. All she could do was watch helplessly as Elder Su reformed his mech. With a casual wave of his hand, he sent the witch flying like a kite with a cut string. After barely regaining her footing, she tried to push her Heavenly Demon Disintegration mode to its maximum for one final all-or-nothing gamble. But Elder Su wasn't about to give her that chance. With the power Elder Su now possessed, he didn't even need a sword to finish her. He just casually flicked his right hand. In the next instant, a massive sword aura thousands of meters long and 100 jang high erupted. No matter how tough the witch's mech was, it couldn't withstand a strike like that. Still, Elder Su ultimately held back. The attack only destroyed her mech without harming the pilot inside, and as soon as it was over, the temporary Saint Rank experience from the Super Realm pill faded away. And just like that, the battle ended, with Elder Su making an incredible comeback from the very brink of defeat. Meanwhile, the heaven-ranked squad leader from the Milan nation, who had been watching the fight from the shadows, tried to bolt the second he saw his holy envoy defeated. But the moment he turned to flee, he found himself completely surrounded by the Yuanding city garrison. The rest of his companions had already been taken down by the city guards who had just arrived. And with that, the battle for Yuanding City was declared a decisive victory for Tandu. However, the once bustling city was now in ruins with broken walls and debris scattered everywhere. Once the fighting died down, President Gu arrived on the scene in her mech, and the second prince immediately went to greet her. As a member of the second prince's faction, President Gu felt incredibly guilty that her family had failed to arrive in time to protect him. But the second prince didn't blame her at all, especially since she'd had the remarkable foresight to bring Seong Xiang along. And it wasn't just Seong Xiang's overwhelming combat power. What the prince valued most was his incredible adaptability under pressure. While they were talking, Seong Xiang bent down and picked up the Yashi soul talisman the witch had dropped. He quietly slipped it into his pocket before going to check on the severely injured Elder Su. Elder Su just sighed with regret, saying that if he'd been in slightly better shape, he might have actually grasped the secret to a real breakthrough thanks to the Super Realm pill. Hearing this, Seong Xiang lowered his voice and cautiously asked if he wanted another pill to take back, so he could find a quiet place to study and unlock its secrets. At this, Elder Su froze on the spot. He glanced around nervously to make sure no one was listening before quietly asking Seong Xiang if he really had another one of those precious 6-star pills. Seong Xiang looked a little awkward and could only manage a dry laugh. After all, a pill that was priceless to others was something he could practically make by the batch with very little effort. A moment later, Elder Su nudged Seong Xiang with his elbow and said bluntly that he'd already figured it out. Seong Xiang was definitely not the host of Zusi. Elder Su had spent countless years tempering himself in the mortal world and exploring more secret realms than he could remember. In his eyes, Seong Yong Xiang had most likely stumbled upon some heaven-defying opportunity inside a secret realm. Still, he made one thing perfectly clear: he had no interest in prying into Seong Yong Xiang's secrets. In return, however, he offered to help Seong Yong Xiang clean up every trace left in the city, letting him continue his peaceful charade as Zuoqi's host. He would consider it a partial repayment for the favor Seong Yong Xiang had done him. Sure enough, the old man's years of wandering the world hadn't been for nothing. He had seen right through the act. Seong Yong Xiang had no better option now but to go along with it. Besides, this old man could also make for a pretty useful test subject. After a full day of fighting, it was high time to head back and rest. Hearing that Elder Su said he also wanted to return to the gatekeeper's quarters to properly tend to his injuries, under Secretary Xiao's arrangements. The two boarded an airship home together, leaving the battlefield behind. 10 days later, inside a first-year boys' dormitory at Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy, Seong Yong Xiang was in the middle of secluded cultivation. These past few days of closed-door training had propelled him straight to the early stage of Earth rank, but it came at a price. He had completely burned through his medicinal supplies. It looked like it was time for a major pharmacy run to restock, but just as he was about to head out, Seong Yong Xiang realized that while he had been in seclusion, a mountain of unread messages had piled up, particularly from that obsessive upperclassman who had been spamming him every single day. Staring at the absurd wall of text, Seong Yong Xiang figured that not blocking her would be doing himself a disservice. But the very second he blocked Senior Shang, a call came in from President Gu. Thankfully, President Gu was calling with 2 pieces of good news. First, she had successfully processed the official certification of Seong Yong Xiang as the host of Star Soul General Zuoqi, meaning he was now Zuoqi's legally recognized owner. Second, the first batch of prototypes based on the Wei Yuan modification plan Seong Yong Xiang had submitted was complete, and President Gu was inviting him to the workshop for testing. Although the Taekwon Heavy Industry Factory had tragically been destroyed during the Beast Tide, all of its master mechanics had thankfully survived. Now that they were all helping with reconstruction at the academy, things were progressing much faster than expected. Gazing at the Mecha Martial Academy in the distance, Seong Yong Xiang let out a quiet sigh. Both the academy and Yuanding City had suffered devastating losses, but on the bright side, his intervention had managed to suppress the Beast Tide. The Milan nation's plot was in ruins, and the classmates and instructors who were originally fated to die had all survived. Perhaps this really did count as changing the course of fate. A few days earlier, before leaving, the second prince had also paid Seong Yong Xiang a personal visit. Hopefully those special souvenirs from the Milan nation would be of some use to him. After all, Seong Yong Xiang had looted them from Milanese prisoners himself. After that, Elder Su also stopped by to personally inform him that every trace of evidence in the city had been completely wiped clean. Seong Yong Xiang could continue playing the part of Zuoqi's host without any worries. While thinking about that, however, Seong Yong Xiang suddenly realized he had made a critical error. That obsessive upperclassman had taken a rift crystal from him, but still hadn't transferred the payment. It looked like he'd have to drag her out of his blacklist after all. On the way to the academy workshop, Seong Yong Xiang noticed two instructors nearby adjusting a memorial monument for the fallen. He thought he had grown numb to such things, but seeing the long list of names carved onto the memorial still left a heavy feeling in his chest. What Seong Yong Xiang didn't know was that while he was away from the Mecha Martial Academy supporting another front, the statue of Zuoqi had also been severely damaged, and among the many memorial tablets and records of the missing, he spotted a familiar name on the list. A short while later, Seong Yong Xiang arrived at the Academy Workshop's training grounds as arranged. President Gu then introduced the man standing beside her. He was Chief Mechanic Nango from Taichuan Heavy Industries forging plant in Yuanding City. He was now leading the team in charge of producing the prototype units. President Gu then introduced Seong Yong Xiang to Master Nango in turn. The moment Master Nango learned that Seong Yong Xiang was the hero who had turned the tide during the Beast Tide crisis, the old man was completely overcome with emotion. What happened next nearly gave everyone present a heart attack. Master Nango suddenly clasped his hands together, dropped to both knees, and respectfully addressed Seong. "Greetings, Mr. Song." Seong was completely flabbergasted. The old man had just dropped to his knees out of nowhere, and a bow that deep was way more than he felt he deserved. Just as he moved to help Master Nango back to his feet, he learned that this was Master Nango's way of repaying him for saving his life. As it turned out, Master Nango and the other mechanics had been trapped inside Taiwan heavy industry by vicious beasts and were on the brink of death. By sheer coincidence, Seong had been passing by and killed the beast, which was the only reason they had made it out alive. So that kneel wasn't just from Master Nango, it represented the gratitude of all the mechanics who had survived alongside him. This put Seong in a pretty awkward position. The truth was, he really had just been passing by that day, so he felt completely unworthy of receiving such a grand gesture. But just then, Master Nango added that he had one more rather bold request, and he hoped Seong would grant it. To keep the old man from doing something even more over the top, Seong could only brace himself and agree to at least hear him out. And the question Master Nango asked was whether Seong had truly designed the prototype mechs all by himself. Seong was baffled. What a strange question. All he had done was add some of his own ideas and improvements. It wasn't like that was enough to cause such a huge reaction, but to everyone's utter astonishment, after getting Seong's confirmation, Master Nanguo immediately asked to become his student. Even President Gu couldn't stay seated after hearing that. Master Nanguo was a fourth-rank mechanic. How could someone of his status possibly ask a first-year student to be his master? With Master Nanguo's skill, many of the Academy's instructors weren't even qualified to work alongside him. But Master Nanguo cut her off and said with deep solemnity, "Judging from the design drafts Mr. Song provided, his level of craftsmanship has almost certainly surpassed that of a sixth-rank mechanic. And I, a mere fourth-rank mechanic, am not even worthy to carry a sixth-rank master's shoes. That is why I'm willing to recommend Mr. Song as Nanzhou's representative for the second-generation mass-produced Star Soul General Design Convention in Tiandu 3 months from now." Hearing Master Nanguo's words, Seong couldn't help but think back to the second-generation mass-produced Star Soul General from his past life, the Henny model. Unfortunately, due to one problem after another, that project was scrapped before it ever got off the ground and never made it to the final battle for Tiandu City. Still, that was a problem for another day. He could deal with it after he settled things back home. So Seong quickly moved on to testing the prototype mechs he had designed. The first unit he tested was an artillery-type mech. It was a model built specifically to boost the overall firepower of combat squads. The heavy cannon mounted on its right shoulder could unleash a devastating soul power bombardment. When a squad encountered a dense pack of vicious beasts, a single soul power shell would be enough to inflict massive area of effect damage. Meanwhile, the honeycomb launcher, mounted on the left shoulder, had even more versatile applications. It could fire 6 armor-piercing rounds at once, either locking onto a single target or spreading them across multiple enemies. And once those rounds struck, they would embed themselves deep in the enemy's body, after which the pilot could remotely trigger a secondary detonation. This meant that in the future, squads would finally have a reliable method for breaking through the defenses of heavily armored beasts or well-equipped infantry. Of course, while this model had improved soul power conversion efficiency, its soul power consumption was still far greater than that of older units. Therefore, within a combat squad, it was best suited for pilots with large soul power reserves and a fast recovery rate. After finishing the artillery model's test run, Seong immediately moved on to the next prototype, the Flying Sword UN model. This version could simultaneously release 8 flying swords controlled remotely through soul power. allowing a single mech to bombard and suppress multiple targets at once. That said, it also came with a very steep learning curve. So for now, it could only be assigned to a small number of elite pilots. Then when it came to the final shield gun prototype, President Gu couldn't help but ask, isn't this basically just a shield and a gun? Compared to the first two, it doesn't seem nearly as impressive. The moment she said that Master Nanguo could no longer contain himself, he quickly explained that while the first two models were indeed incredible in terms of their technical breakthroughs, this one's greatest strength wasn't some revolutionary innovation, but rather its tactical value. At that point, Seong asked President Gu to set up a series of high-speed moving targets modeled after Hood-type beasts. He even specifically asked her to set up a ton of them, explaining that it was the only way to truly showcase the mech's real power. Faced with those one-to-one holographic simulations, Seong Xiang immediately switched his cannon to scatterfire mode and threw up a close-range defensive barrier. As his cannon continuously spewed fire, the charging enemy projections were instantly engulfed in a sea of flames. Witnessing this, President Gu finally grasped the true tactical value of this unit. If it were to replace traditional shield bearers on the front line, just imagine what the battlefield would look like. While all three prototypes still had their flaws, they were already incredibly close to what Seong Xiang had originally envisioned. After powering down the construct, Seong Xiang immediately told Master Nanguo to head back right away and have his team produce more of these as quickly as possible. After that, Seong Xiang asked President Gu for one more favor. He hoped that in about a month, she could lead a team of elites and bring these prototype mechs to the southern frontier wall to back him up in battle. Seong Xiang couldn't explain the exact reason just yet, but he assured her he had reliable intel. In 1 month, something major was going to go down over there, and for now, he needed to return to the Song family first to prepare. He promised to contact her in advance when the time came. Hearing this only made President Gu even more suspicious. Meanwhile, after leaving Nanzhou Mecha Martial Academy, Seong Xiang immediately called the Hong Clan Merchant Guild. On one hand, he needed them to purchase a batch of medicinal materials for his cultivation. On the other, he asked them to book him a seat on the next airship back to the Song family. But just as Seong Xiang arrived at the Yanding City Air Harbor, he suddenly spotted an incredibly familiar figure near the front desk. The moment she turned around, Seong Xiang knew exactly who that little girl was. The memory she'd left him with in his past life was just far too painful. In his past life, after the Beast Tide broke out, Yuanding City was almost completely annihilated. Back then, Seong Xiang had been nothing more than a useless nobody, and all he could do was flee the city along with the crowds of refugees. But along the way, they were attacked by vicious beasts multiple times, forcing the refugees farther and farther south until they ended up wandering into the Death Desert. At the time, everyone thought there wouldn't be any beasts in the desert, so the group stopped to rest at an oasis. By then, Seong Xiang had completely fallen into despair and was just sitting alone in an open area, staring blankly into space. That's when a little girl suddenly ran up to him and curiously asked if he was a Star Soul Master, since she'd spotted the Mech Soul talisman in his hand. Before Seong Xiang could even answer, she held out the bun in her hand and said she wanted him to have it, in her mind. As long as he ate his fill, he'd have the strength to protect the other refugees. Even though Seong Xiang hadn't eaten in days, every time he remembered he was just a piece of trash who could only fight for 3 minutes, he lost his appetite completely. Besides, in a situation like that, something so precious should have been saved for her and her family. But their stomachs were far more honest than their words. In the very next moment, the two of them were sitting there, each quietly eating half a bun. But halfway through their meal, the little girl suddenly asked if he was a student from Mecha Martial Academy. She said her older sister wore the same uniform and was a third-year student there. Before the refugees fled the city, her sister and all her teachers had joined the fight to hold back the beasts, buying time for everyone else to escape. The moment Seong Xiang heard that, he instantly knew her sister was probably gone. Before he'd escaped, the battle had already become a complete slaughter. And perhaps it was the look that flashed across Seong Xiang's face. But the little girl seemed to realize something in that instant. Her eyes immediately welled up with tears. And yet even then, she showed a strength far beyond her years. With tear-streaked cheeks, she told Seong Xiang that one day she would become a mechanic just like her father. She would build a Star Soul General even stronger than the Waiwan-type mech, and wipe out every last one of the vicious beasts. After saying that, she urged Seong Xiang to hurry up and finish the bun, telling him he needed the strength to protect her. She even declared that her half of the bun was a betrothal gift to him. From now on, Seong Xiang had to be her one and only personal test star soul master. Then, with a completely innocent smile, she held out her pinky asking for a promise, and seeing that pure, carefree smile, Seong Xiang felt a tiny spark of warmth return to his dreary life. But he never could have imagined that their conversation that day would be their very last. While the desert was free of human civilization and thus shouldn't have attracted dimensional rifts, a group of vicious beasts had been lying dormant, deep beneath the sands. At the time, Seong Xiang had already assembled his mech, and was doing everything in his power to hold back the beastly assault. But tragedy struck all the same. After he finally defeated the giant centipede beast, he looked down and noticed a familiar little arm lying at his feet. That single horrifying discovery completely erased the joy of the victory he had just won. It was one thing to have failed to fight alongside his classmates and teachers from the academy, but he couldn't even protect one little girl. What kind of Star Soul Master did that make him? Seong Xiang threw his head back and let out a roar of pure anguish, trying to release the grief crushing his heart. The memory ended there. Back in the present, the little girl's family was being stopped by staff at the boarding gate. The reason was quite simple. Her father, Tong Jing-shu, had just resigned from Taichuan Heavy Industry, which meant he'd lost the priority boarding privileges for technical staff and their families. On top of that, the air harbor was still under official wartime control after the battle. As a result, his family would have to wait for next week's airship to leave Yuanding City. Seeing this, Tong Jing-shu's wife, Shindai, quickly stepped forward to keep her husband from making a scene at the counter. Just then, Shindai's niece, Shin Rui, also spoke up, asking if her status as a Star Soul Master from Mecha Martial Academy could get her relatives on board. But according to the rules, the answer was no. With her current status, she could only board by herself and wasn't allowed to bring family along, just when the family was at a loss for what to do. Seong Xiang suddenly appeared behind them and said calmly, "If I use my status to bring them on, that should be fine, right?" The young woman at the front desk was still processing his words when Seong Xiang presented the Supreme 666 Platinum membership card from the Hong Clan Merchant Guild. The number of people qualified to hold such a card could be counted on one hand. The staff instantly realized that Seong Xiang's status was far from ordinary. They hurriedly invited him aboard, nervously explaining that Manager Hong was already on the ship, waiting for his arrival. Seong Xiang didn't waste words in response. He simply walked straight toward the boarding passage. Meanwhile, Tong Jing-shu's family was completely stunned by what they'd just witnessed. Even Shindai couldn't help but quietly ask her husband if he somehow knew Seong Xiang. But Tong Jing-shu could only offer a bitter smile and shake his head. Even a chief mechanic from Taichuan Heavy Industry wouldn't necessarily qualify for the Hong Clan Merchant Guild's Supreme Card. So how could an ordinary man like him possibly know someone as important as Seong Xiang? Then from the side, Shin Rui chimed in, saying that she did know Seong Xiang. They were both students at Mecha Martial Academy, and she remembered he was the one who had personally saved her during the Beast Tide. And so, under the staff's guidance, the entire family was soon led into the magnificent number 1 heavenly cabin. And sure enough, Manager Hong, the man who had arranged Seong Xiang's ticket, was waiting there for him. After they met, Seong Xiang briefly introduced Manager Hong to Shin Rui's family, then followed the manager alone into the suite to discuss some matters. Manager Hong might have looked warm and approachable on the surface, but in reality, he was a sly old fox who knew how to play the game. He had previously presented the level 5 pills Seong Xiang gave him to the higher-ups. And because of that, he'd been promoted to chief manager of the Nanzhou branch. To solidify his ties with Seong Xiang, he was naturally willing to treat him with the highest possible courtesy. This particular suite could completely block out any outside sound or soul power fluctuations, which meant Seong Xiang could use the journey to refine a new batch of pills, once everything was settled. Manager Hong prepared to disembark, and his place was taken by a demonkin attendant in a maid outfit. She approached Seong Xiang with perfect courtesy and softly asked if he required any services. The moment Seong Xiang saw her, he realized it had actually been many years since he'd last seen any of the demonkin. In his previous life, after the crushing defeat in the final battle of Tiandu City, Seong Yong Xiang had been swept into a spatial rift inside the Imperial Tomb's secret realm. By the time he reappeared, the chaotic spatial currents had dragged him all the way to the southern continent home, to races like the Demonkin and the Spirit Folk who have an innate imbalance in their 2 star soul veins. This imbalance had always made it extremely difficult for them to become true star soul masters. On the eastern continent, humanity reigned supreme. Demonkin and Spirit Folk were considered weaker races and had long lived under human protection. But on the southern continent, the tables were completely turned. Demonkin and Spirit Folk lived together in harmony, while humans were so rare that most people only knew of their existence through old records, and as such a rare sight. Seong Yong Xiang naturally caught the eye of a god-ranked patriarch from the Battlebore clan who promptly invited him for a personal meeting. After that, Seong Yong Xiang joined the Battle Peak lineage, and was even personally accepted as a direct disciple by the Battle Patriarch. The nearly miraculous alchemy skills he now possessed were the very ones he had learned back on the southern continent. Unfortunately, that Battle Patriarch happened to be one of the very few Demonkin hosts who possessed a Star Soul General. But during the Great War 500 years ago, that Star Soul General was sealed by the 5 Elements Grand Array, which meant Seong Yong Xiang had no way of copying it through his Star Lord system. He didn't know if he would ever get the chance to return to the southern continent. After all, that place held far too many of his regrets, along with countless unsolved mysteries. Just then, the sudden melancholy on Seong Yong Xiang's face only served to confuse the cute Demonkin maid. She was probably wondering if choosing a meal could really be that difficult for such an important guest, so she respectfully handed him the menu and invited him to order. Seong Yong Xiang had barely turned to ask what the little girl's family wanted to eat, when the little girl instantly shot up from the sofa and loudly declared that she wanted steamed buns. The moment her mother saw this outburst, she panicked and immediately began to scold her daughter, telling her not to bother Mr. Song. She even added that, in a place this luxurious, how could anyone ask for something as plain as buns? But while she was still lecturing the child, Seong Yong Xiang calmly told the maid to bring them 5 servings of buns. Seong Yong Xiang knew perfectly well that buns weren't even on the menu, but that wasn't a problem. He had money now. If the ship didn't have them, they could simply make them. He even specifically requested that 2 of the portions be stuffed with radish. And if there were no radishes on board, they could just go buy some right now. Faced with the most important guest on the entire airship, the maid naturally wouldn't dare to neglect any of his requests. She immediately turned, took the storage talisman Seong Yong Xiang handed her, and hurried off to the kitchen to place his order. Once the food order was settled, Seong Yong Xiang was just about to relax for a bit, when the little girl suddenly ran over to his side and happily asked if he liked radish stuffed buns too. In response, Seong Yong Xiang casually made up an excuse, saying that he'd tried them once before and had loved the taste ever since. Hearing that, the little girl lit up and earnestly declared that radishes were so healthy and nutritious that no one could possibly dislike them. Then she even pulled out a radish-stuffed bun she had prepared before leaving and offered it to Seong Yong Xiang. The moment he saw that painfully familiar bun, Seong Yong Xiang couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion well up in his chest. Sure enough, this little one was exactly the same as she was in his previous life. Her favorite was still radish-stuffed buns, and seeing how happily and wholeheartedly she ate made her look so adorable it was impossible not to stare. And after they finished sharing that bun, that familiar scene seemed to play out before his very eyes all over again. But this time, Brother Song had the power to protect Xiaolan. The promise he couldn't keep in his past life was one he might finally be able to fulfill in this one. Meanwhile, following the head chef's instructions, the demonkin maid headed to the airship's central garden to borrow some radishes grown by a Miss Jinhua. Hearing the request, Miss Jinhua couldn't help but feel a little curious herself. Why would such a distinguished guest specifically ask for something as common as steamed buns, and even insist on a radish filling? Even so, she warmly told the maid to pass a message along to the chef. She suggested that when making the buns, he could add a touch of sugar and honey to the filling to make them taste even better. Hearing this, the maid happily left cradling the radishes in her arms. At that very moment, 2 distinguished guests from Heavenly Cabin number 3 arrived at the entrance to the central garden, however model. The security staff informed them that the airship was about to depart, and for safety reasons, the central garden was temporarily closed during takeoff. They were politely asked to come back later. The second she heard that the young lady Neela immediately flew into a rage. She started making a huge scene on the spot, demanding that Feige take her inside right that instant. While Feige was still trying to calm her down, the glass doors to the central garden suddenly slid open and a maid carrying a bundle of radishes happened to rush out from inside. And just like that, she ran right into the young lady. As a demon maid, her first instinct was to hurry over and help clean the dirt off the young lady's clothes. But what she got for her trouble was a sudden attack from Feige. He delivered a brutal kick straight to her throat, and he clearly wasn't holding back. The maid was sent smashing through the glass doors and flying straight into the central garden. Even after attacking her, Feige still wasn't done. He continued to mock her, sneering at her identity as a lowly demon servant. As if beating her wasn't enough, he then turned and viciously stomped all over the radishes that had fallen to the ground. Seeing the radishes that Seong Xiang had specifically requested being trampled, the maid forced herself to crawl forward through the pain, still trying to apologize to the noble brat. But for merely grabbing Feige's pant leg for a trembling second and begging him to stop, she was rewarded with yet another round of savage beatings. Watching him assault the service worker so openly, a nearby guard couldn't stomach it anymore and moved to step in. But before he could now step forward and blocked him. She even pulled out a storage talisman, casually explaining that her older brother's family had once been killed by rebellious demon slaves, so Feige tended to lose control the moment he saw demon kin. Besides, she said it was just a lowly servant anyway. Even if they beat her to death, they could just pay some compensation and be done with it. But just as Nao was still speaking with the guard, a white figure flashed past behind her. At the same time, Feige, still fully absorbed in the thrill of beating someone weaker than himself, suddenly found his arm locked in place by a single hand. The one grabbing him was none other than Seong Xiang. His face was overflowing with killing intent, and his reason for stepping in was simple. He wanted to see exactly who thought they could act so arrogantly on his ship. The only reason he had even come here in the first place was because Xiaolin had just asked him to take her to the central garden to play. And that was exactly how he happened to witness this disgusting scene. Some trash-tier nobody at Black Rank, like Feige, was actually threatening to make trouble for him. Seong Xiang suddenly felt like finding out who exactly was going to make life difficult for whom. Even with Seong Xiang holding him down with one hand, Feige was still unwilling to accept it, and even tried to summon his Star Soul general to fight back. But before he could manage it, Neela rushed over and forcefully stopped him. She then immediately offered a storage talisman loaded with 50,000 lower domain coins as compensation. Apologizing to Seong Xiang and asking him to forgive what she called their momentary lapse in judgment. This sudden humility from Neela left Feige completely stunned. He couldn't understand why she was lowering herself like this to beg Seong Xiang for forgiveness. But in the next instant, Neela punched him hard and furiously scolded him for even thinking of summoning a Star Soul general on the ship, since she could already sense that Seong Xiang's cultivation was at least Earth rank or higher. A worthless Black Rank insect like Feige trying to fight Seong Xiang was no different from showing off a cheap trick in front of a true master. He was completely out of his depth. Seeing even his own young mistress back down, Feige could only bow his head in humiliation and apologize to Seong Xiang, begging this powerhouse to let him off the hook. Seong Xiang didn't even bother responding. He simply ignored them and walked straight toward the injured Xiam. Realizing that Seong Xiang had no interest in continuing the matter with them, Neela and Feige quickly turned and left. In truth, Seong Xiang had already pieced together that they were from the lower domain nation. Since their values were fundamentally different, there was no point in wasting any more time arguing with them. This was because the lower domain nation bordered the demonkin settlements of the eastern continent. Capturing demonkin to sell as slaves across different nations had long become one of its major industries. In their eyes, demonkin slaves were nothing more than merchandise with no dignity to speak of. If Seong hadn't spent so much time living side by side with demonkin on the southern continent in his previous life, he might not have cared so deeply about this either. Looking at the battered Seong Yong Xiang immediately took out a revitalization pill and prepared to give it to her. But the second she laid eyes on the pill, she panicked and immediately refused his kindness, insisting that something so valuable shouldn't be wasted on someone as unworthy as her. Hearing her continue to ramble about not being worthy of such a precious pill, Seong Yong Xiang decided he'd heard enough and simply grabbed her jaw and popped the pill right into her mouth. A life is a life after all, no matter how humble a person's station might be. Who was anyone to decide the value of a life based on status? Besides to Seong Yong Xiang, a simple revitalization pill was hardly a big deal. He could whip up a whole batch whenever he felt like it, once everything was settled. Seong Yong Xiang prepared to take Xiaolin and Xinru back to the cabin. Xiaoyun was still a little bummed that she didn't get to play in the garden, but the moment she saw Sister Yaoan crouching to pick up the scattered radishes, she immediately scampered over to help. Even a little girl like her knew a thing or two about respect, which only made those people from the lower domain look all the more pitiful. Seong Yong Xiang quietly filed the incident away in his mind. If he ever got the chance, he would absolutely make them pay. Shortly after, Hong Shipping's passenger airship number 8002 officially prepared for departure. Meanwhile, inside the sealed room of Heavenly Cabin number 1, Seong Yong Xiang was completely focused on refining pills. Each and every pill laid out on the table was a gift he had prepared in advance for the Song family. He could only hope that when a real crisis struck, these pills would be enough to help them pull through. As for the few level 8 pills he'd set aside, those were the final trump cards Seong Yong Xiang was keeping for himself. At that very moment, back at the Song residence in Yongan City, Uncle Sanmu was reporting to the old master that Seong Yong Xiang's flight was scheduled to arrive before noon the next day. The instant old master Jing Xiang heard the news, he immediately ordered Sanmu to notify every single member of the Song family that they were expected home for dinner the following evening. He also stressed repeatedly that no matter what, Sanmu had to go to the air harbor himself and personally welcome Seong Yong Xiang home. Even so, the old master still didn't seem completely at ease. Right after, he ordered his daughter in the military to be contacted, instructing her to dispatch 2 Skyguard warships to escort Seong Yong Xiang's airship. The butler wanted to voice his concern about deploying military warships without proper authorization, but the old master shut him down on the spot, telling him to just come up with an excuse and make it happen. The entire future of the Song family was riding on this. There could be absolutely no mistakes. After Uncle Sanmu left the room, the old master gazed down at the photograph in his hand and muttered softly, "That child, Seong Yong Xiang, not only healed his damaged soul veins, but he also seems to have gained some incredible power. My dear daughter-in-law, could it be is everything really happening just as you predicted all those years ago?" As a ray of sunlight streamed through the window, the image in the photo became clear. It was a warm and peaceful image of a young couple holding their newborn baby. In front of the frame sat 2 mixed soul talismans, one blue and one white. Meanwhile, back in Heavenly Cabin number 1, just as everyone was starting their meal, an attendant respectfully informed Seong Yong Xiang that a Miss Jinghua would be performing in the central court, later asking if they'd like to see the show. The name Miss Jinghua instantly brought a flood of fond memories back to Seong Yong Xiang. In the future, she would become one of Tiandu's 4 great songstresses, Wind, Flower, Snow, and Moon, renowned for being a gifted singer-songwriter. Back in his previous life when he was serving in the Black Armor Guard, Seong Yong Xiang had been one of her biggest fans. Even now, he could still vividly recall several of her most famous songs. So the rumors about her once being a resident performer on Hong Shipping's vessels were actually true. Looks like he'd definitely have to ask her for a stack of signed posters later. As Miss Jinghua's graceful voice began to fill the air, Seong Yong Xiang and his party soon arrived at the performance hall. But because Seong Yong Xiang was a guest of Heavenly Cabin number 1, the moment he appeared, he instantly drew everyone's attention. Everyone was secretly wondering just what kind of big shot was staying in the Diamond Supreme section, a place reserved for the Hong Merchant Guild's most esteemed guests. What was even stranger, though, was why this supposed VIP looked so incredibly ordinary. By the time they had all found their seats, however, Miss Jinghua's solo performance was already over. Immediately after, the host grandly announced that the next act was a play adapted by Miss Jinghua herself, based on the true story of a hero from the Battle of Yuanding City, a man who had single-handedly turned the tide against the beast horde. The title of the performance was Battle of Yuanding City, the Lone Rider Who Slew a Demon Horde. The moment Seong Yong Xiang heard that title, his heart skipped a beat. He had a very, very bad feeling about this. At first, the play on stage seemed normal enough, just your typical Star Soul general fighting off monstrous beasts. But the second the actor playing the Star Soul General Zuozi stepped onto the stage, the whole thing went completely off the rails. The moment Zuozi appeared, the audience went absolutely wild. After all, everyone knew from the news that this was the hero who had saved them. Even little Xiaowen, sitting off to the side, was watching with sparkling eyes, completely captivated by the performance. Then when the stage version of Zuozi transformed into Lubu, one young man in the crowd gasped, shouting that he'd seen that exact scene in the city that day. The moment he said that, the surrounding audience's reverence for the hero shot up another level. At that point, the only person in the entire venue who was dying inside was Seong Yong Xiang, who was screaming internally. Why does the actual person involved have to sit here and watch this? This is just way too embarrassing. But the absolute worst part was yet to come. Somehow, these people had even found out he saved the second prince, except they'd gone and rewritten the second prince as the second princess. And to make things even worse, they'd added a whole romantic subplot where she devotes herself to him to repay his kindness. If the real second prince ever found out about this adaptation, he would probably murder someone on the spot just to liven things up. And yet, for some bizarre reason, the chubby kid sitting nearby was watching this ridiculous nonsense with tears in his eyes. Seong Yong Xiang could only wonder what kind of terrible taste this guy had. Right then, Seong Yong Xiang wanted nothing more than to dig a hole and bury himself. He was mortified. His toes were cringing so hard they were probably carving a 3-bedroom apartment into the floor. Maybe it was Seong Yong Xiang's non-stop sarcasm and palpable secondhand embarrassment. But whatever the reason, it thoroughly annoyed the young master sitting beside him. In the young master's eyes, Seong Yong Xiang was being disrespectful in 2 ways. First, to Miss Jinghua, the playwright, and second, to the hero portrayed in the play itself. The boy furiously demanded that Seong Yong Xiang apologize to the hero. Seong Yong Xiang just rolled his eyes internally. Does this kid have a screw loose? It's just a play. Why is he taking it so seriously? Besides, the actual hero is sitting right here in front of you. Instead of demanding an apology for him, shouldn't you be polishing his shoes? When the young master saw that Seong Yong Xiang still wouldn't budge, he immediately called over his 2 bald bodyguards and began to pressure him, insisting he apologize to the hero in the play. Seong Yong Xiang had to wonder what it would look like if these idiots found out he was the so-called hero. Seeing how aggressively they were behaving, Xiaowen immediately jumped in too, planting herself beside Seong Yong Xiang and backing him up without a second thought. That instantly made the chubby young master so angry his whole face turned beet red. Meanwhile, the siblings from the lower domain nation, who had clashed with Seong Yong Xiang earlier, saw a perfect chance to step in, lend a hand, and maybe smooth things over with him. So, the 2 of them came over and joined Xiaowen in teasing the chubby young master, seeing even more people piling on. The young master tried to put on airs and order them all to back off, but Feige just pulled out his mech soul talisman and coldly said the brat was ruining his viewing experience. If he kept making a fuss, Feige would teach him a lesson personally. In response, the bald bodyguard on the other side also drew his soul talisman, clearly ready to throw down with Feige right then and there. Just as the 2 sides were about to start brawling over the commotion, around Seong Yong Xiang, Miss Jinghua finally stepped in from the stage to calm things down. Sure enough, the second they heard Miss Jinghua herself speak, the 2 hotheads instantly cooled their jets. Anyone could tell Miss Jinghua's emotional intelligence was off the charts. She first thanked the young master for appreciating her performance. Then she gently explained, opera is adapted from popular tales. So naturally, a great deal of artistic embellishment is added. What you see on stage isn't the literal truth. Then she turned towards Seong Yong Xiang and said sincerely, perhaps this young master from cabin number 1 actually took part in that battle himself. As someone who witnessed it firsthand, if he has complaints that parts of the play don't reflect reality, I am more than willing to accept his criticism with humility. It's just that from the perspective of a commercial performance, some exaggeration during the adaptation is unavoidable. So I hope this young master can be understanding. At Miss Jinghua's words, Seong Xiang could only manage an awkward smile. Honestly, he hadn't meant to nitpick. He had just gotten carried away and blurted it out without thinking. To ease the slightly awkward atmosphere in the room, Miss Jinghua smoothly suggested that everyone return to their seats and enjoy the rest of her performance. Naturally, no one objected. The crowd quickly settled back in, ready for more. As for Seong Xiang, it had been many, many years since he'd last heard Miss Jinghua sing. Ever since he left the Eastern Continent in his previous life, she, on her way to becoming one of Tiandu's 4 great songstresses, had released countless unforgettable songs. Even now, he still remembered many of them by heart. The only question was whether the legendary songs that truly made her famous had been written yet. While Seong Xiang was lost in these memories, Miss Jinghua's performance came to an end. The audience immediately burst into cheers, shouting that they hadn't had enough and begging her for one more song. Seeing how enthusiastic everyone was, Miss Jinghua smiled and graciously offered to sing another song, asking what they wanted to hear most. To her surprise, the crowd answered almost in perfect unison. They wanted to hear Burning Star, the unfinished song. Even Seong Xiang, as one of her old fans from his previous life, remembered clearly that this was the very song that had launched her to fame and secured her place among Tiandu's 4 great songstresses. He hadn't expected it to exist this early on. The thought filled him with a mix of nostalgia and disbelief. But on stage, Miss Jinghua apologetically explained that Burning Star was still unfinished, since the audience was so passionate, though she was willing to let them hear part of it first. As her clear and beautiful voice slowly rose into the air, Seong Xiang found himself unconsciously humming along under his breath. The imagery in the lyrics pulled him straight back into the turbulent years of his previous life. He had once been nothing more than a worthless student looked down upon by everyone, and yet he had ultimately died in the final battle for humanity's survival. And now fate had thrown him back to the present. That one line, "The one who returns will be me," felt as if it were written just for him. By the time he realized he had completely lost himself in the song, Miss Jinghua's performance had already ended. When Seong Xiang finally snapped out of it, he noticed everyone around him was giving him strange looks. At that moment, Xiaom quietly leaned in and whispered, "Young master song?" Miss Jinghua hasn't actually finished writing the ending of this song yet, but just now, you sang the ending for her. And just like that, Seong Xiang went completely numb. He'd gotten lost in his memories again and had unintentionally changed history once more. A song so moving it could break your heart and a kindred soul so hard to find. The moment Miss Jinghua heard the line Seong Xiang had unconsciously sung, her whole body began to tremble. That one line, "the one who returns will be me," had struck a chord deep within her own past as well. One day, she too would walk openly and proudly into the Lin family of the Shu Nation and face the past she had never escaped. More importantly, the ending of this song had troubled her for a long time. But after hearing the line Seong Xiang had just hummed, it was as if a fog had suddenly lifted from her mind. The knot in her heart loosened, all at once. Perhaps that was why, when she looked at Seong Xiang now, her gaze had become distant, hazy, and filled with complicated emotions. This abrupt shift left Seong Xiang at a loss for how to respond. This accidental change to history, whether it would become a blessing or a disaster, was something he truly couldn't tell yet. But just then, the soul power around Miss Jinghua suddenly began to stir violently. As a star soul master, Seong Xiang could tell at a glance that she was breaking through to the next realm. And sure enough, after being stuck at Yellow Rank Peak for so long, Miss Jinghua's cultivation finally advanced the moment the knot in her heart was undone. Perhaps it was because she had suppressed it for far too long. This sudden breakthrough left her body and mind flooded with relief. The sensation was so overwhelming that she nearly cried out on the spot. Even the night sky itself was lit up by the soul power pouring out from Miss Jinghua's breakthrough. Seong Xiang had never expected that one careless little spoiler from him would end up pushing her cultivation to the next level. Looking at Miss Jinghua, who had just broken through and was now in a weakened state, he couldn't help but think that maybe this accidental slip of his had actually turned out to be a good thing after all. But just a moment later, dark clouds suddenly began to gather overhead. At the same time, the air around them started crackling with the telltale energy of a dimensional rift. Could this be... At that very moment, alarms started blaring in the ship's command room as the system detected a rift forming in the nearby airspace. Seeing this, the captain wasted no time and immediately gave the order. Halt acceleration at once and deploy the highest level defensive arrays. Prepare for enemy contact. Shortly after the airship's defensive barrier was fully activated, a massive spatial rift ripped open in the sky. From it poured swarms of Bifang-type beasts. The most dangerous thing about them was their terrifying ability to fight in coordinated groups. In the blink of an eye, the ship was under attack from all directions at once. The ship's security team reacted instantly, launching a desperate counterattack. Everyone was on edge because they all knew one thing: if the defenses fell, everyone on board would die. Facing this sudden siege, the captain knew his security forces alone couldn't possibly plug every hole in their defenses. So he sent out an emergency broadcast to everyone on the ship, ordering all Star Soul Masters among the passengers to join the fight, because if the hull was breached, no one was walking away alive. Meanwhile, things in the central court had also descended into chaos. The violent shaking of the ship nearly sent Miss Jinhua tumbling, and she almost fell right off the stage. Fortunately, Seong Xiang reacted in a flash, dashing forward to catch her. He also completely agreed with the captain's assessment of the situation. Judging by the state of things, the ship's defensive arrays weren't going to hold out for much longer. These beasts obviously weren't just passing by. They were here to destroy the ship and everyone on it. Could this be another disaster he'd caused by changing the course of history again? Before long, the beasts found the weakest point in the ship's defensive barrier and started focusing all their firepower on it. The moment the captain got the report, he tried to send the security team to reinforce that spot. But the communications officer urgently reported that the fighting at the bow was already too intense, and the security team was completely pinned down with no way to pull back. Faced with this reality, the captain's only hope was to pray that one of the powerful distinguished guests in the heavenly cabins would step up to help. Meanwhile, the situation back in the central court was just as dire. Ms. Jinhua, despite her recent breakthrough, immediately started helping to evacuate the crowd. But just then, several beasts circling above the airship ramped up their assault, unleashing their full power against the array's weak point. Under the relentless barrage, cracks finally started to spread across the top of the defensive shield. A second later, the beast attacks were already breaking through and raining down into the garden itself. Just as the dancers on stage with Miss Jinhua were about to be crushed by falling rubble, a small defensive array suddenly materialized above them, blocking the falling debris. Miss Jinhua immediately realized it was Seong Xiang who had saved them, having cast an instant array with a single motion. But the situation was changing too quickly. Seong Xiang had no time to register the shock on her face, as beasts were already pouring into the ship through the breach. At the same time, the bald bodyguard with the chubby young master shoved a Star Soul General Talisman into the boy's hands for protection. He then immediately turned and joined the fight to defend the ship. Seong Xiang had been about to lend him a hand, seeing him struggle against the beasts all alone. But just then, the Star-Lord system suddenly shot him a warning. The system had detected an overwhelmingly dangerous presence, something far beyond Seong Xiang's current ability to handle. Was about to appear near the ship, and it was urging him to escape immediately. The moment he heard that, Seong Xiang's heart sank. If the Star-Lord system was calling it a super-level threat, it definitely wasn't talking about these Bifang-type beasts. Did that mean something above St. Ronk was about to show up? The problem was, at this altitude, Seong Xiang had no way to safely evacuate so many people. Aside from the copied Lubu, he only had 2 other Star Soul General Talismans on him. If he had a Star Soul General like Seo Ren or Bai Chi, who had flight or mass transport abilities, things would be a different story. With that in mind, Seong Yong Xiang immediately gave Xiaowen's family two choices. They had to either head to the lower deck for shelter immediately or stay by his side, which meant they'd almost certainly get caught in the battle. Right after that, he turned to Xiang and asked if the ship had any small escape pods they could use to get away. But Xiang could only tell him that there was indeed one, and it was reserved exclusively for the bridge crew. After hearing that Xiang's family agreed with the plan to retreat to the lower deck for safety. But at that very moment, their niece, Shen Ruo, suddenly stepped forward, saying that as a star soul master, she couldn't just leave. She had to stay behind and protect everyone. Plus, this time, she wanted to fight side by side with Seong Yong Xiang. Meanwhile, the chubby young master's bald bodyguard wasn't lasting much longer. Before long, he was completely flattened by the beast, which honestly just showed that his fighting skills weren't all that impressive. Even the lower domain duo watching from the sidelines looked a little speechless. But for the overall safety of the ship, they had no choice but to put everything else aside, pull out their own Star Soul General Talismans, and join the fight. Just as Bodyguard Wu was about to be hit head-on by a beast's soul power beam, Faiga fired off a soul power beam of his own at the last second, blocking the beast's attack and giving Bodyguard Wu a brief moment to catch his breath. After that, Feige and Bodyguard Wu immediately started teaming up on the beast that had broken into the ship. Unfortunately, since both of them were only black rank, there was no way they could break through the beast's defenses head-on with their level of strength. Realizing this, Feige quickly suggested that he would draw the beast's attention while Bodyguard Wu looked for an opening to land a finishing blow from behind. So they weren't completely clueless, but they weren't far from it either because they had clearly forgotten one very important thing. There was never just one beast coming through that opening. Just as Bodyguard Wu found an opening and raised his axe to strike from the back, another beast suddenly burst in from the side and sent him flying. It was only then that everyone truly realized that the beasts were pouring into the ship nonstop through the crack in the defensive barrier. And in the blink of an eye, they had already started blasting the inside of the ship indiscriminately with soul power attacks. Faced with that sudden wave of destruction, Miss Jinghua and Shenrua both immediately summoned their mechs and prepared to block the incoming barrage. Luckily, the number of beasts that had gotten inside was still limited for now, which meant the bombardment hadn't spread too far yet. That was the only reason everyone managed to scrape by this wave without any immediate casualties. Even Tang Jinsui's family, who had just been debating whether to head for the lower deck shelter moments ago, remained safe for the time being inside the defensive array Seong Xiang had set up. As for the chubby young master, after that last scare, his legs had gone so weak he couldn't even stand up. Fortunately, his other bodyguard, a man named Uncle Ma, reacted quickly enough to raise his shield and protect him. Otherwise, a spoiled young master like him would never survive more than 2 chapters on a real battlefield after witnessing such a brutal fight up close. The young master's confidence completely shattered. Even after summoning his mech, he just sat there on the ground, limp and unable to move. At the end of the day, he was still a total rookie, but the beast didn't care if he was inexperienced or not. One of them suddenly lunged forward, charging straight for the bodyguard protecting him. Meanwhile, the young master himself was still fumbling around in a panic, trying to switch weapons with absolutely no strategy. Luckily, right before the bodyguard was about to be overwhelmed, the young master finally managed to pick a weapon and rushed over to help. Maybe bigger guys really do have a bit more brute strength because when he brought that hammer down, the effect was surprisingly decent. At the same time, Seong Xiang was trying to convince Tang Jinsui's family to give up on retreating to the lower deck, because under the circumstances, staying by his side was actually the safer bet. After all, they had already missed their best chance to evacuate. So now the only real choice left was to follow Seong Xiang's plan. Right after that, Seong Xiang also made it clear that even stronger beasts might show up soon. If things truly got out of hand, he would find a way for them to abandon ship and escape alive. But the second Tang Jinsui heard that his overly righteous side suddenly kicked in. He immediately challenged Seong Xiang, asking if he really planned to ignore the lives of everyone else on the ship, and then started preaching about how, with great power, comes great responsibility. Seong Xiang could only shake his head to himself. Turns out every era has its fair share of self-righteous saints. And in stories like this, people like that rarely ended well. Thankfully, Tang Jingshui had a sensible wife who stopped him right away. Otherwise, their whole family might have met the same tragic fate as they did in Seong Yong Xiang's past life. Perhaps worried that her husband's words had offended, Seong Yong Xiang Shandai quickly apologized and promised that her family would follow his lead completely from now on. Seong Xiang didn't say anything more. After all, they were only on this ship because he'd brought them along. So no matter how chaotic things got, Seong Xiang had already decided he would prioritize their family's safety. Meanwhile, things were looking grim all over the battlefield. Over with Bodyguard Wu, he was pinned to the ground by a beast and couldn't move. Luckily, Feige showed up just in time with a sneak attack from behind. The problem was, their weapons just weren't strong enough to do any real damage. Even after getting hit, the beast whipped its head around to retaliate. Fortunately, Feige was prepared for it. He thrust his sword straight up, piercing through the beast's lower jaw, but even after they finally took that one down, there was no time to feel relieved because another beast had already locked onto them in the next instant. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Miss Jinghua and Shinrui were teaming up against a beast. This one was much smarter, though. It kept its distance, peppering them with ranged attacks and forcing them to constantly dodge. And because of that, Ms. Jinghua was just a split second too slow on a dodge and was snatched from behind by another beast which whisked her right into the air. Then, with a vicious heave, it threw her right at Shin Rui. The two collided before they could even react. The next moment, the beast started charging up an attack, preparing to finish them both off in one go. Facing the attack, neither of them had any time to react. Just then, a red mechanical arm shot out from the side and snatched the beast by its tail. It then swung with incredible force, slamming the beast from the air straight into the ground, followed by a brutally clean finishing blow, splitting the beast's skull wide open. Everyone present was so shocked they were speechless. The whole exchange had happened too fast for anyone to even process. Only Shin Rui felt her heart calm the moment she saw that red arm appear, because she knew Seong Xiang had finally made his move. The hero who turned the tide back in Yuanjing City had finally entered the fray. Meanwhile, the young master from the Zhang family was in a tough spot with a beast practically sitting on his head. After finishing off the beast that was attacking Miss Jinghua, and Shin Rui Seong Xiang immediately noticed the other situation. Maybe it was because of how brutally he dispatched its companion. But the beast on top of young Master Zhang froze in place from just a single glare. Seizing the opportunity, Seong Xiang instantly threw the Sky-Piercer halberd, which flew with a deafening roar. The incoming halberd ripped the beast to shreds on the spot. When young Master Zhang came to his senses, he stared in disbelief. The hero from the Yuanding City stage play was standing right in front of him. For a moment, he wondered if he was just dreaming out of sheer terror. But Seong Xiang had no time for his fanboying. Beasts were still pouring from the sky through the breach in the defensive barrier. At this rate, even with the ship's entire security force and every Star Soul Master fighting together, they wouldn't hold out for much longer. Seong Xiang had wanted to conserve his strength for the hidden danger the Star-Lord system warned him about. But now it was clear he couldn't afford to hold back any longer. In the next instant, Seong Xiang ordered the Star-Lord system to unlock the Earth-rank armament of Lu Bu's soul armor. The Skybreaker Dread Cloud Bow, the strongest long-range weapon in Lu Bu's soul armor arsenal. Its power was immense, but its soul power consumption was just as monstrous. If he hadn't been pushed to the brink, Seong Xiang really wouldn't have wanted to use it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, bodyguard Wu and Feige were cornered by three beasts. By the looks of it, both of their soul power reserves were nearly empty. Just in the nick of time, several bladed rings suddenly appeared and slashed toward the beasts all at once. The moment Feige laid eyes on those flying rings, he knew exactly what they were. They were the prototype weapons for young Lady Na's soul armor. Had things really gotten so bad that she had to join the fight herself. And sure enough, young Lady Na had arrived as backup, piloting the lower domain nation's latest custom soul armor. Her arrival helped even the odds a bit, but their side still held no clear advantage. Right away, Na quickly laid out her plan. She would use the flying rings to hold down two of the beasts, while Wu and Feige focused all their energy on taking out the isolated one as quickly as possible. In response, bodyguard Wu immediately volunteered to grab the beast's attention head-on, creating an opening for Feige to circle around for a back attack. But just as they were about to spring into action, a massive beam of soul power suddenly ripped across the battlefield, blasting the beast in front of them to smithereens. And the attack didn't stop there. It continued tearing across the battlefield. Every beast it touched exploded on impact. Not a single one survived. The sight left the three of them completely stunned. The very beasts that had been wiping the floor with them just moments ago were suddenly gone. Then at the far end of the battlefield, a towering figure slowly emerged from a sea of smoke. That gigantic arrow of soul power had come from him. No matter how hard they tried, Na and the others simply couldn't comprehend how the beasts that were crushing them seconds ago had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. Bodyguard Wu even started to wonder if his eyes were playing tricks on him, because he just couldn't believe what he had seen. The siblings from the lower domain were thinking the exact same thing. That strike had been impossibly fast. In the span of a single blink, every beast before them had been utterly obliterated. Once he finally got a clear look at the figure, young Master Zong cried out that the hero from Yuanding City had come to save them. His shout immediately drew everyone's attention to Seong Yong Xiang. But Seong Yong Xiang himself was inwardly a little annoyed, thinking he'd gone a bit overboard with that last shot. After all, he had accidentally blasted a huge hole straight through the ceiling of the luxury cabin. Still, since most of the luxury cabin passengers were already in the area, there shouldn't have been any casualties. At that moment, Miss Jinghua shouted a warning from behind him, telling him to watch his back. Seong Yong Xiang spun around to find three bong-type beasts diving right at him from behind. Faced with this, Seong Yong Xiang immediately ordered the Star-Lord system to unlock Lu Bu's third weapon, the Skybreaker Claw. In the next instant, the Skybreaker Dread Cloud Bow in Seong Yong Xiang's hands began to transform. In a flash, the massive bow reconfigured itself into a vicious mechanical claw. The first to charge in would be the first to fall. The first beast to rush forward was caught perfectly by Seong Yong Xiang's timing and sliced clean in half at the waist. The second beast immediately sensed the danger and slammed on the brakes in midair. But in front of Seong Yong Xiang, that just made it a perfect stationary target. With another swing of the Skybreaker Claw, the beast was effortlessly skewered like a shish kebab. The third beast had probably never seen anything so horrifying in its entire life. After watching its companions get butchered, it actually turned tail and tried to flee on the spot rather than get any closer. But since it had already shown up, there was no way Seong Yong Xiang was letting it get away. Before it could climb any higher to escape, he leaped after it in a single bound. Then as he drove the claw through its body, he deliberately avoided every vital point. If that thing thought it could sneak up on him, it was about to enjoy the special electric torture feature built into the Skybreaker claw. Unfortunately for it, the beast's body was a bit too fragile for that treatment. After twitching for just a few moments, it was already fried to a crisp. As satisfying as it was to slaughter beasts like that, what really worried Seong Yong Xiang was the super-level threat the Star-Lord system had warned him about. If the system had already detected it, then by all logic, it should be appearing any second now. At the same time, everyone watching the battle was completely floored by the sheer overwhelming force of Seong Yong Xiang's combat power. Even Miss Jinghua, who was also a black-ranked Star Soul Master, had already stopped focusing on the battle and was instead wondering how she could possibly get Seong Yong Xiang on her side to help achieve her own goals. Meanwhile, Faiga, who had crossed paths with Seong Yong Xiang before, was now trembling as he quietly asked Na whether that terrifying man was really the senior from Heavenly Cabin Number 1. Na answered without a moment's hesitation that yes, it was him. The moment Feige got his confirmation, his scalp went numb. Looking back on it now, their earlier conflict felt absolutely terrifying in hindsight. If he'd actually dared to fight back then, he probably would have met the same fate as those beasts. Neela wasn't about to show him any mercy either. She immediately mocked him, saying that if she hadn't stepped in to smooth things over, next weekend would have likely been his memorial service. Although the immediate crisis was averted for the moment, the truth was that the ship didn't have much time left. Because while everyone was still reeling from the shock, even more beasts were already swarming onto the ship through the breach. At that same moment, the command room received the worst news yet. The Grand Defensive Array was on the verge of collapse. At most, it would only hold for another 10 breaths. Worse still, no reinforcements had arrived. Faced with this situation, the captain could only grit his teeth and order the communications officers to keep blasting distress signals on every frequency. But at that exact moment, one of the beasts locked onto the ship's command room and charged straight for it. The captain immediately ordered everyone to evacuate the bridge. Yet just as the beast was about to smash through the command room glass, another crimson mechanical arm suddenly shot out and seized it by the throat. In the next instant, a single casual slash cut through it, splitting the beast neatly in two. The people on the bridge, having just survived a split-second brush with death, all found themselves thinking the same thing. Could that Red Star Soul General really belong to one of the passengers on this ship? Just then, one of the crew members beside the captain cried out in disbelief. Wasn't that the hero from Yuanding City who had been all over the news? How could someone of his caliber actually be on their ship? Meanwhile, the battle at the bow of the ship had already turned brutally desperate. At a glance, only 2 security officers were still barely holding the line to protect the massive number of passengers aboard the airship. The security captain had clearly made his peace with fighting to the very end. To others, they might just be low-status security guards. But like countless ordinary people, they were the pillars holding up their families. To calm the younger guard beside him, the captain even forced a relaxed tone, telling him that the Hong Merchant Guild would never mistreat its own. If they died here, the compensation package alone would allow their families to live comfortably. Hearing his captain say this, the younger guard could only grit his teeth and force down the fear in his heart. So when the next wave of beasts came surging in, he chose to meet them head-on. Unfortunately, his marksmanship was terrible. The beast in the air didn't even bother dodging as it rushed straight through his shots. Seeing this, the captain had no choice but to shove the younger guard out of the way, turning to face the beast's charge himself. And just as the beast was about to deliver the killing blow, the captain's expression turned strangely calm. Because he knew that if he died here, the compensation would finally pay off the crushing debts back home. This might be the last thing he could ever do for his family. But in that very instant, between life and death, a crimson sky piercer halberd ripped through the air once again. At the same time, a massive Red Star Soul General appeared behind him. It seemed fate hadn't abandoned him because Seong Xiang had arrived at that exact moment. But when Seong Xiang looked up at the sky, his expression didn't ease in the slightest. Above them, the sky was still packed with beef fang-type beasts. If he had a Star Soul General like Cao Ren or Bing, right now, one better suited for battlefield control air dominance, or large-scale suppression, things would be far easier. Seong Xiang quickly counted the beasts overhead. In just that short time, more than 20 had already gathered. In that case, there was only one thing left to do: test out a combo he had recently developed. The Sky Piercer halberd that Seong Xiang hurled with all his might carved a perfectly sharp arc across the night sky, and that arc kept flying deeper and deeper into the densest cluster of beasts above. At the same time, Seong Xiang once again summoned Lu Bu's Skybreaker Dreadcloud Bow, then aimed directly at the flying Sky Piercer halberd and fired a massive beam of soul power straight into it. Once the two attacks merged in midair, the crystal on the Sky Piercer halberd refracted the energy, splitting the soul power beam into multiple streams that instantly blasted every beast within range. The sky was swallowed by non-stop explosions, the whole scene looking like a New Year's fireworks show. Even the 2 surviving security officers were completely stunned. They probably couldn't have dreamed up a combo like that, even if they spent their whole lives trying. But before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, the area was swarmed by beasts all over again. This time they had clearly learned their lesson. They knew that getting any closer meant certain death. So they kept their distance on the perimeter, preparing instead to destroy the entire airship with long-range attacks. To make matters worse, several of the larger beasts had likely already reached Earth rank or higher. Could these be the threat the Star-Lord system had detected earlier? Even if Seong Yong Xiang managed to get everyone through this next wave alive, There was no guarantee the airship itself would survive. And at this altitude, if the vessel lost power, the consequences would be catastrophic. Fortunately, at the most critical moment, a barrage of heavy artillery fire suddenly erupted from the distant sky. The beasts surrounding them were instantly swallowed up by the bombardment. The reinforcements were none other than the Song Army's Ruhu-class Skyguard warships. Just then, the main screen in the ship's command room lit up with the image of a fierce female general. She immediately ordered the Hong airship to disengage and withdraw from the combat zone. With the arrival of 2 Skyguard warships from the Song family's Scarlet Luan army, the deteriorating situation on the battlefield finally eased up a little. The pilots aboard the Hong airship were thrilled to see the reinforcements arrive, but the captain was still staring blankly at the screen. He was completely unable to understand why the Song army, which should have been stationed along the southern frontier, had suddenly appeared here. Had they truly come all this way just to save them? One of the communications officers overheard the captain muttering to himself and said he was probably overthinking it. Most likely the Song army had just finished a mission and was simply passing through the area. Hearing that, the captain finally snapped back to attention and immediately ordered the airship to drop its defenses and redirect all available power to the engines. Right now, their top priority was to exit this airspace as fast as possible. At the same time, standing at the bow, Seong Yong Xiang was also looking up at the Song army ships that had come to their aid. If he wasn't mistaken, that had to be the Scarlet Luan army. The elite force, personally founded by his eldest sister, Seong Yong Xiang, a military unit made up entirely of female generals. Had the Song family really gone to such lengths just to bring him home, they had actually dispatched 2 Skyguard warships from the Scarlet Luan army. And sure enough, inside one of those warships, Uncle Smoo was standing beside the commanding officer, watching the situation unfold. Meanwhile, the female general was openly remarking that she could hardly believe the young Marquis would actually travel aboard such a shabby civilian vessel. To think the former leader of the 4 great playboys had suddenly become so low-key, Uncle Moo could only answer with a helpless smile, saying that people do grow up eventually. Perhaps the young Marquis really had changed. He then specifically reminded the general to take a good look at the Red Star Sol general standing at the bow of the civilian ship. The female general needed only one glance to recognize him immediately. It was the powerhouse from Yanding City, the very man reported in the news to have saved the second prince. Hearing that, she couldn't help but say that the young Marquis must have some incredible ancestral luck to end up on the same ship as that kind of expert. Even if he was still his same useless self, his luck was insanely good. She even said outright that if the Red Star Sol general hadn't been here, the civilian vessel never would have lasted until their arrival. Hearing her talk about his young master, that way Uncle San Moo could only close his eyes in silence. He was thinking that if they ever found out the mighty expert they were talking about was actually the useless young master, Yong Xiang, they would probably be shocked beyond belief. Meanwhile, at the bow of the Hong airship, Seong Yong Xiang was about to tell the security officers to fall back and recover while he returned to the central court to regroup with everyone else. But at that exact moment, the Star-Lord system suddenly issued another warning. In 5 seconds, an ultra-scale rift will emerge. Host must leave the current airspace within 5 seconds. That warning genuinely shook Seong Xiang. Could it be that even the arrival of 2 Skyguard warships was still not enough to resolve this crisis? Just what kind of monster was about to come out of that rift? Meanwhile, back in the airship's central court, the guests from the luxury cabins had gathered together again. Bai, the one from the Lower Domain Nation, was actually still complimenting young Master Zong on his performance in the fight, while Na, on the other hand, was already calmly calculating the value of her full coverage safety insurance compensation. Elsewhere, Miss Jinghua was also sincerely thanking Shin Rui. If Shin Rui hadn't stepped in to help just then, Miss Jinghua probably would have been seriously injured by now. But right in the middle of their conversation, Seong Zhang suddenly rushed back, in piloting Lubu's Star Soul General, and landed right in front of everyone. The moment he arrived, he quickly downed 3 soul-replenishing pills in a row to force his soul power back up. Then, without wasting a single breath, he urgently told Tang Jinshu's family and Shin Rui to grab Xiaowen and come with him immediately. But just as he finished speaking, the beasts that had been swarming in the sky suddenly scattered in every direction as if they had received some kind of command. The moment Seong Xiang saw that, his heart dropped. He knew they were out of time. The super-level threat the Star-Lord system had warned him about had probably arrived. Sure enough, in the next second, the sky itself looked like it was being torn apart by sheer force, and a colossal, dimensional rift burst open. Then deep within that rift, pairs of gigantic crimson eyes slowly began to glow. And the owner of those eyes was a type beast so massive that it made the Skyguard warships look like tiny toys in comparison. Faced with that sight, Seong Xiang genuinely couldn't wrap his head around it. Why on earth would a god-ranked type beast appear here of all places? Could it really be because he had accidentally altered Miss Jingua's path just now and triggered some crazy deviation in fate? This was it. They were doomed. The legends hadn't exaggerated at all. This thing was like an entire airborne city. Compared to it, their few ships were nothing more than insects buzzing around a god-ranked beast. These little vessels wouldn't even be enough to get stuck between its teeth. Was everyone here really fated to die in the sky tonight? The moment she saw it appear, even the female commander of the Scarlet Luan army turned pale with shock. But Uncle Sun Moo, standing beside her, looked surprisingly less fazed. He even murmured under his breath, "Could this be the beast the third madam once prophesied?" At the same time, the Star-Lord system had already calculated a retreat route for Seong Yong Xiang. Faced with a monster like this, retreating seemed to be the only realistic option left. Given the Eastern continent's current strength, the only ones capable of threatening a god-ranked beast like this were probably those two god-ranked patriarchs. But even so, Seong Xiang could still sense another deeply abnormal soul power fluctuation coming from this type beast, and its current state clearly looked wrong. What in the world was going on with it? Before he could make sense of it, the beast had already begun taking a massive breath to gather its power. The instant he saw that Seong Xiang shouted for everyone to cover their ears, while at the same time pulling out a 5th rank isolation array and preparing to activate it. Almost the very moment his warning ended, the beast let out a roar so devastating it felt like it could shatter heaven and earth. That single roar made the entire surrounding space tremble, and woven into the sound was its overwhelming soul power pressure. The weaker security officers were instantly shaken until blood burst from all 7 of their orifices. Under suppression of this level, ordinary Star Soul Masters had no hope of fighting back. Many of them couldn't even keep their Star Soul constructs active. Thankfully, the luxury passengers in the central court were at least somewhat protected by the isolation array he had managed to put up in time. This darned god-ranked beast was absurd. It had only let out a single roar, and yet the damage was already this overwhelming. If it actually got serious, everyone here would probably be wiped out in an instant. Meanwhile, aboard one of the Scarlet Luon Army's Skyguard warships, Uncle Sunmu was holding up a heaven-ranked Gangchi barrier to shield the female commander from the shockwave of the god-ranked beast's roar. When she saw that the female commander initially thought the beast had already launched a direct attack, but Sunmu grimly told her that what they had just experienced was only the colossal-type beast's most ordinary roar. That answer made her scalp tingle, a sound wave so catastrophic it felt world-ending, and that was just a casual roar. If that monster let out a few more like that, every last one of them would die here. Sunmu could only nod with a grave expression. He admitted that if the beast roared one more time, even he might not be able to keep holding on. Their only chance now was to interrupt it the moment it drew in a breath to charge up again. After hearing Sunmu's judgment, the female commander no longer dared to hesitate and immediately ordered the port side cannons to lock onto the type beast. Against a target that enormous accuracy wasn't the issue. Everyone was simply waiting for her command to fire. But just as she was about to give the order, Seong Xiang finally forced his way into their communications channel and sternly told them to stop at once. To make sure they understood he wasn't just spouting nonsense, Seong Xiang chose not to hide anything any longer and directly revealed his true identity. The moment she saw his face, the female commander froze. No matter how she looked at it, she just couldn't figure out why that infamous good-for-nothing young master was in the cockpit of the Red Star Soul General, seemingly in the know about everything. Uncle Shengmu quickly chimed in, explaining he was there on the old Marquise's direct orders to escort young Master Yong Xiang home with the warships. The words, "come home," hit Yong Xiang harder than he expected. Since his past life, it felt like an eternity since he'd truly heard those words, and for a moment, even his own heart wavered. But this was clearly no time for getting sentimental. Yong Xiang quickly suppressed his feelings and ordered them to close the cannon ports because with their current level of strength, there was no way they could pose a real threat to a peak god-ranked beast like this one. But based on the nature of this type of beast, as long as they didn't openly show any aggression, it would see them as nothing more than a few tiny flying insects. And as long as those insects didn't try to bite first, it usually wouldn't waste the energy to hunt them down. After getting the Scarlet Luon Army on board, Yong Xiang then contacted the captain of the Hong merchant vessel and told him to follow his instructions to the letter. At the same time, he commanded every Star Soul Master on all 3 ships to immediately deactivate their constructs, shut down all propulsion systems, and let the entire formation go into a freefall. Only once they had completely dropped out of the god-ranked beast detection range could they restart their engines and flee the area at full speed. This was the only way anyone here was getting out alive. Their survival depended on following his orders precisely. And so the moment Yong Xiang's countdown finished, all 3 airships cut their power, simultaneously plunging into a powerless freefall. At that moment, among everyone there, Yong Xiang was the only one who kept his Star Soul construct active, using his own soul power to pull along the passengers who couldn't disengage safely in time. As he fell, Yong Xiang was also frantically calculating their current altitude and the boundary of the beast's detection range. Only by completely exiting the creature's perception zone did they have any hope of survival, but he soon realized he'd overlooked one crucial detail. Just because the massive god-ranked beast wasn't making a move, didn't mean the smaller ones would leave them be. And sure enough, it wasn't long before the Python-type beasts began closing in from above. If they were caught by those creatures during the freefall, the consequences would be dire. At that critical moment, Yong Xiang's voice once again echoed over the ship-wide broadcast. He ordered all 3 vessels to immediately restart their engines at full power and break through in the 316 direction. The moment that order came through, the commanding officers on board didn't hesitate for a second, immediately ordering their pilots to execute the command. Even though they had temporarily escaped the biggest threat, it was still uncertain if they could truly shake off the Python-type beasts chasing them. At this point, all they could do was hope to survive with nothing more than a good scare. Even with all 3 airships pushing their sold engines to the max, they still couldn't shake off the beast chasing them. To make matters worse, at the worst possible moment, the Hong Merchant Guild's airship suddenly had a power source failure, and its flight speed dropped noticeably. At that moment, the captain's heart sank. He didn't even need to think to know why. They must have burned too much energy maintaining the defensive arrays. They had just barely escaped the god-rank beast. And now the ship chose this exact critical moment to drop the ball. The Scarlet Luon army, of course, immediately noticed the problem with the Hong vessel, so the female commander made a split-second decision, ordering Ship 2 to fire boarding cables at the Hong airship and tow it along by force. No matter what, they absolutely could not abandon the defenseless passengers. Shortly after, her order was given several heavy boarding lines shot out one after another, piercing straight through the Hong vessel's armor on both sides and locking on tight. The Hong captain, completely unaware of what was going on, thought the beasts had finally caught up. He immediately ordered everyone into combat readiness. Even if they really could not escape, they absolutely would not just sit there and wait to die. But just as he gave the order, his assistant pointed out that the ship's speed was actually increasing again. It didn't seem like they'd been attacked by the beasts at all. Hearing this, the captain finally breathed a small sigh of relief. At least for now, he wouldn't have to lead his entire crew into a fight to the death. But unfortunately, good news and bad news always come tied together. Precisely because of the towing link, the speed of the Scarlet Luon Army's warships was noticeably dragged down. As a result, a group of high-rank Bang-type beasts soon seized the opportunity to close in on the rear of the entire fleet. What was more troublesome was that they couldn't use the main ship cannons right now, because once they fired, it would divert a portion of the power away from the thrusters, which would only make the fleet's overall speed even slower. Seeing this situation, the female commander immediately ordered the Wei Yuan combat squads aboard to deploy, directing them all to the lift platforms to engage the beasts. Upon receiving the order, the female soldiers on the ship didn't hesitate in the slightest and immediately sprang into action. Soon, one after another, red-painted Wei Yuan soul armors were sent up by the lift platforms to the combat positions at the bow. Although the Scarlet Luon Army was a military force made up entirely of women, their combat power wasn't the slightest bit inferior to any other elite unit. Under the swift organization of the squad leader, these female soldiers quickly formed a three-line firing formation, facing the swarm of plunging beasts head-on. Those beasts had barely entered firing range when they slammed headfirst into a barrage of firepower so dense it bordered on madness. Unfortunately, the standard red Wei Yuan armors they piloted were ultimately better suited for ground combat, and they inherently suffered a significant disadvantage in aerial warfare. So before long, the defensive formation at the bow of Ship 2 was forcibly torn open by those beasts using near-suicidal impact charges. What had initially been a fairly orderly ranged suppression battle instantly deteriorated into a brutal close-quarters melee. Seeing this, the female commander immediately ordered the squad on Ship 1 to divert half their firepower to support their sisters on Ship 2. The effect of this order was almost instantaneous. With Ship 1's firepower cutting in, the previously precarious combat situation on Ship 2's side was immediately alleviated by more than half. Seeing the situation stabilize slightly, the squad leader at the bow of Ship 2 immediately seized the opportunity, ordering everyone to quickly clear the beasts off the deck and reorganize the defensive formation as fast as possible, hearing their captain's command. All the female soldiers surged forward almost simultaneously, charging head-on into the beast swarm to slaughter them. But right at this most critical moment, another batch of Bang-type beasts suddenly appeared directly above the bow. Upon spotting them, the squad leader had just opened her mouth to shout the order for everyone to immediately form a turtle shell defensive formation. But in the very instant before her command was fully out, a massive beam of soul power slashed across the sky, instantly wiping the entire swarm of beasts above their heads clean. How could Seong Xiang, the young master of the Song family, possibly just stand by and watch the family's female generals fight a desperate battle alone? So at this moment, he had already raised Lu's Skybreaker Dreadcloud bow once again, providing long-range cover for their battle from the rear of the fleet. But the soul power consumption of that weapon was downright outrageous. Seong Xiang had barely fired a single shot before he had to swallow another soul-replenishing pill just to refill his energy. And of course, the timing could not have been worse. That overwhelming display had just drawn the attention of a huge number of beasts straight to him. Faced with that, Seong Xiang had no choice but to deliberately dial down the Skybreaker Dreadcloud bow's power and switch to rapid successive shots to keep the situation under control. Fortunately, the weapon's base power was still terrifying. Even with its output suppressed, it was more than enough to one-shot beasts of this level. At the same time, Uncle Smoo and the female commander were watching Seong Xiang's battle from inside the Skyguard warship's command room. Looking at the strength Seong Xiang was displaying now, the female general simply couldn't make sense of it no matter how hard she tried. She couldn't understand how the useless young master everyone once looked down on had become so terrifying. Ever since the beast assault began, the battle had already dragged on for a long time. The merchant ship's original security force had suffered such devastating losses that it was practically no longer combat effective. Meanwhile, Seong Xiang had to stay at the bow to support the Scarlet Luon army, which meant he couldn't spare the attention to defend the stern of the merchant ship for now. With no better option, young Master Zong forced himself to step up and organize the Star Soul Masters from the VIP cabins, who were still capable of fighting, sending them to hold the rear. After surviving several life-or-death clashes, they had finally started to develop some rough teamwork. The three groups quickly formed a temporary triangular formation. Young Master Jing Side, along with the duo of Miss Jinhua and Shin Ruo, took charge of defense and kiting. As for the main damage output that was handled almost entirely by the pair from the lower domain, Faye kept her distance, constantly pressuring the beasts and methodically herding them into the effective range of Na's soul armor. Then Na used her 3 sets of golden moon rings to take them down in carefully timed bursts. But just as everyone was fighting with everything they had, the god-ranked beast behind the fleet suddenly turned its gaze toward their side of the battlefield. The moment its eyes swept over them, the Bifang-type beasts circling overhead all stopped their attacks simultaneously. That sudden shift left everyone at the stern frozen in place. No one knew what was about to happen next. Then the colossal Kun-type beast let out another deep roar that thundered across the heavens. The moment the sound reached them, the Bifang-type beast above immediately turned and flew back toward it. Seeing this, everyone finally let out a sigh of relief, as the beasts were clearly withdrawing from the battlefield at high speed. This desperately needed piece of good news quickly made its way back to the Scarlet Luon Army's command room. After hearing the report from her subordinates, the female commander finally let out a long sigh of relief. Seong Xiang also felt the tension in his nerves finally ease just a little, because this meant they had truly escaped the god-rank beast's alert range. This time, he had really managed to get everyone out alive. The tragedy of his past life had not repeated itself. After all, for this narrow escape, Uncle Seong Mu didn't hesitate for a second to give all the credit to Seong Xiang. He knew very well that if Seong Xiang hadn't been there was absolutely no way any of them would have escaped that god-rank beast alive. This only made the female commander even more curious. She truly couldn't understand how Seong Xiang knew the beast's habits so well. Unfortunately, Seong Xiang had no energy left to answer any of her questions. He was exhausted to the core, and more than anything, just wanted to find a place to crash. With that, he dragged his utterly drained body step by step back toward the others. Only after confirming that everyone was still safe, did Seong Xiang finally let his guard down and pass out on the spot. To avoid disturbing his rest, Shenroy kept reminding Faye and the others to keep their voices down. Watching the scene, Miss Jinhua couldn't help but smile as well, the tension finally easing from her face. After everyone returned to Heavenly Cabin number 1, the others silently bowed toward the unconscious Seong Xiang in gratitude before quietly leaving one by one. After some more time in the air, Seong Xiang was finally awakened by the ship-wide broadcast. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that Shin Ruo had somehow fallen asleep, leaning against the edge of his bed. Looking at her sleepy, clearly exhausted face, Seong Xiang could tell this journey had worn her down just as badly. He had no idea how long he'd been asleep, but judging from the situation, they were probably almost there. Seong Xiang couldn't help but murmur to himself, "Yong City, the Song family. I'm finally back." But at that very moment, their airship entered Yong'an City's airspace. A pair of eyes on the ground was already watching them in secret. The man in the lead joked to his subordinates that they'd taken so long to arrive he'd nearly fallen asleep waiting. His men quickly explained that traffic had delayed them and asked the boss not to hold it against them. The man didn't seem angry at all. He casually waved it off and then corrected them with a serious face, saying that from now on, they were not to call him Big Brother or Boss anymore. Their White Dragon Gang was now a respectable organization. So from this day forward, they were to address him properly as Guildmaster. Right after that, he made sure to remind all his men of one very important fact. He Sun Xie was destined to become one of Tiandu's 8 generals and the strongest Star Soul Master of his era. 30 years east of the river, 30 years west of the river. The next age would without question belong to him, Sun Xie. After finishing that grandiose little speech, he raised the ring, hanging around his neck, and quietly asked Elder Du, when exactly am I going to get the Star Soul General Tao Ren? The ring answered his question almost immediately. Very soon. That opportunity belonged to Sun Xie, and it also belonged to